Hello, everyone. Welcome to Through the Years, episode 50. Yes, this is the podcast where we review Ring of Honor show by show from the beginning. And for 50 episodes, you've heard this voice, Trevor Dane, this horrible voice. And then the other voice you've heard for 50 episodes is, as always, the more melodious, just comforting, has a new headset mic, the sound of Matt Feuerstein. Matt, we've been here for 50 episodes, 3 years. I actually made a playlist archiving all the shows recently just because Big Round Number was coming up. It's 135 hours, not counting this episode. So assuming we do the average around 3 hours, give or take, by the end of this episode, we will have done 138 hours of audio. That is over 5.5 days, I think. Just too much. Too much.
First of all, it's the first time anyone's ever complimented the sound of my voice, whether it be speaking or singing. So you're in rare company, I guess, as in there's no one that's with you. But it is. We have talked a lot, and in some ways, that's an impressive sounding number. Then I think about all the people that do this every single week, including watching a show also, and I'm like, how? How does anyone do this with a life and anything? So my hat's off to them because this seems like a lot of work, and it took us 3.5 years to do this?
Yeah, and I was just thinking, we do a podcast that's, give or take a little bit, 3 hours. We do it probably every 3 to 4 weeks, sometimes a little quicker, sometimes a little later. And I was thinking it probably takes me, for every 3-hour show, we also watch a 3-hour show. And for me, between just notes and research and stuff, it probably takes me another 3 hours beyond that. So I'm just thinking, so if you times the 5.5 days by 3, we've devoted probably a half a month of our lives each to, if that was no sleep or anything to this. Imagine like you were saying, there are people that do 3-hour podcasts every week. Like, how much of their lot, and who have been doing it for years longer than us, it's going to be an insanely significant chunk of your life. Like when you put it into that kind of, quantification where you just put into how many days is this, how many weeks is this. I mean, those nut bars that between the sheets do a 6-hour podcast every 2 seconds or something. It's at some point they've done probably more podcasts than essential human things. Probably it's just crazy.
I mean, I guess when there's money involved, it's more of a motivator, but there are plenty of people that do this for free also, just like us. And yeah, I think about Conrad Thompson. I've said this before. I assume he makes a lot of money off of those shows. There certainly are enough advertisements on them. But he does that 4 times a week, and a lot of times he's watching a show for the podcast, and he has a regular business that he runs, and a child, and a marriage, and it's well, I ain't complaining.
Yeah. I thought actually I think we did this once a long time ago where it was probably one of the year-end episodes where I thought we should thank a lot of people. But another side effect of us being around for 50 episodes in 3 years is we've been around long enough that I occasionally feel there's certain things we should say or do again. So I thought we should just kind of go through the history of the show very quickly and thank the people along the way. Because I was thinking back, Matt, and in a weird way, this whole show, the first two people that are kind of in some ways responsible or to be blamed for the show are the Cubs fan, the famous, our friend and our famous, the English language lucha news source extraordinaire, and Joe Gagney, because the Cubs fan always has www.thecubsfan.com. People know the Lucha blog, but less people maybe know thecubsfan.com, which he often used just as a place to put his friends' podcast, to host them. And then we got Joe versus the World, Joe Gagney's podcast, which is, I'm not going to say that's the first wrestling podcast ever, but at least in certain circles, I would say it was a pretty influential. A lot of the people that did that show were either people that had just started their own wrestling podcast, and that was an early guest appearance somewhere else for them, or they're people like you and me that went on to start podcasts after guesting. And Matt, I was thinking about this, was Joe versus the World your first podcast, at least in a wrestling context?
The first that I was on, or the first that I listened to?
Your first guest appearance.
Oh yeah, I mean, who else would have me on a podcast other than Joe Gagney? That was one great thing about Joe, is that he would have people on that he knew if he thought that they knew what they were talking about. even if they were complete nobodies. And I was a complete nobody. I was not, I was literally, I'm still obviously just a nobody, but no, I'm happy that way. But I'm just a guy, just a guy who went to ROH shows. Like, I didn't have any sort of profile anywhere. Some people who were on message boards with me knew me and found me annoying. And Joe and I hooked up, as in like sat next to each other and talked, not the other kind of hooked up. Oh, I wish. At an ROH show in Connecticut in 2005. And then by the spring of 2006, I was basically the ROH correspondent. Please don't go back and listen to those. But basically the ROH correspondent on Joe versus the World. And of course, like you said, Cubs Fan hosted that show, then later hosted my show, and then hosted our show.
For the first 4 episodes, yeah.
Yeah. So, sorry.
No, you go on, sorry.
Well, and then, of course, Joe, our pod father, so to speak, he's still on the show. He'll be on in a couple episodes. We love having him on. He's the best. We like making fun of him too. But really, we think he's the best.
Because funny, like that, my first wrestling podcast was episode, I think it was 50 of Joe versus the World, where he decided that like anyone that wanted to be on just for a couple of minutes could submit. And I had vaguely known Joe, and I had known a lot of the people like you that had been guests on his podcast. And I thought like Joe was going to be more like structured, like I would bring a topic, but then he'd ask questions or stuff. And I didn't realize Joe was just going to basically be like, this is your time. I'm kind of going to let you run with it. And I haven't listened back to it. I can't, but if you listen to my short segment on the 50th episode of Joe versus the World, you see me quickly realize like Joe isn't really going to be engaging in much of a back and forth, and I have nothing to say. And you can practically hear the cold sweat and the panic, and I just pick up a PW Insider magazine, not PW Insider, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, and just start reading a random article about the 10 nastiest things the Nasty Boys have ever done until Joe like puts me off the air, and he made fun of me afterwards and all that stuff. And I remember after that show, I said like, I'm never going to do a wrestling podcast ever again, but if I ever do, I'm going to be so over-prepared so that never happens to me again. And then you and I had known each other since you know where this is going. You and I had known each other since we were like teenagers and AOL Instant Messenger chats, the same forums, and we used to talk about Ring of Honor, but we hadn't talked in years and years. I always am afraid of imposing on anybody, so like I don't really talk first to people. It's not that I don't enjoy talking, but you, of course, started your own great podcast, which we've plugged before on thecubsfan.com, List 'em and Learn, and you would have a guest on and do top 10 lists of sometimes about wrestling, sometimes about entertainment. And out of nowhere, you had the insanity to be like, that guy that only has one wrestling podcast appearance and he did horribly that no one's like talked to in years. Like, how about I bring him back? Because I remember talking to him and we did the episode, I believe it was like 10 worst booking decisions in wrestling history. And I prepared for that so much and like reread things and watched footage and I remember I think you were like, oh yeah, I just wrote my top 10 like an hour or two before the podcast.
I'm so lazy.
And I just felt like the biggest weirdo then over preparing, but I remember you being like, oh, this did good. And then, hey, would you like to do another episode where we go over, knowing that we had the Ring of Honor connection, like the 10 best wrestlers in Ring of Honor history. And then after you did that, as we've mentioned before, the origin of the show is you saying after that episode, like, how about we just do a show that covers Ring of Honor, like chronologically? You mentioned like,
where the big boys play.
Big boys play. Yeah, it's kind of like not necessarily to ape the show, but just like imagine if we could do a show that was even that close in quality, because we both enjoyed that show, but for Ring of Honor instead of WCW. And so we started doing it. And then after 4 episodes, Chad Campbell, one of the co-hosts of Where the Big Boys Play, which is a show on the Pro Wrestling Only network, the network we're on, but that's a great show. If you like, we've plugged it before, but not anytime recently. If you like the kind of show we do, but about WCW, they covered up till, I forget, like early 93 maybe or late 92, every WCW pay-per-view and Clash of the Champions. They did a great job, great podcast, Parv and Chad Campbell. And so Chad was an early listener of our show, asked us 4 episodes in, would you like to come to the Pro Wrestling Only Network? He's been just always really nice to us, a big supporter, always mocks me for not reviewing, being a grumpy person when it comes to how highly I rate these matches.
He still uploads our podcast for us, so
yeah,
he's a huge part of the show to this day.
Yeah, and beyond that, I think the only people we have to thank is just everyone that's ever listened, whether it's for an hour or all 135, and of course all our great guests. I mean, every guest. We don't have guests on very often because I think we're a podcast where, at least I am, I'm extremely stressed about putting anybody out for even a second, which is probably also not coincidentally why most of our guests have been people that have been like explicitly told us like, I would like to do your show. Like, I think maybe the only person that we came to them was Joe Sposto, who even me coming to him was like, he's been so nice to us publicly and talking about enjoying the podcast that like we should have him on. And there's other people I'd like to have on, but it's just, again, I think it's a big ask to do this show. 3 hours, often on a weekend night. A lot of, it's hard for me to justify asking people to do that sometimes without feeling monstrously guilty. But all our guests have been great. Alan Cunahan, Justin Shapiro, Joe Sposto, Joe Gagney, Keith Lipinski, just everybody has been great guests. And everyone that's ever listened, like, you have so many options when it comes to wrestling podcasts. The fact that you spent any of your time like listening to us, it's always like a super cool. I hope that feeling whenever someone says, "Oh, I really like the podcast," like I still to this day get like that little drip of endorphin rush, like, "Oh, that feels good." That's a little more serotonin on my brain, and I hope that, Matt, never goes away.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess I should also add, as far as the people to thank, there are a few other people. First of all, different people who have run the Pro Wrestling Only Podcast Network at different points, because it's been more than one.
Absolutely.
Yes. And I'm hesitant to say names because I don't always honestly totally know who's running it at a given time. Do you know who's running it right now?
I know Charles in the past. I mean, I don't know.
I'm pretty sure John at one point did. But so I can't say for sure. But both of them, thank you very much. But also, I want to thank kind of our brothers almost in doing a similar job. Jeff Schwartz and Shane Hagedorn at an honorable mention. They boost our show a decent amount of the time. They're big supporters on their own show. They're big supporters on Twitter. Listening to their show is great inspiration for us. It's kind of trying to gives us something to aim toward. They do what we do, possibly better. Oh, definitely better, and definitely better than me. Trevor has an excessive amount of research that I still find extremely impressive. And definitely, they do it every week, which is a lot more impressive.
They make us look bad. That's why I didn't want to give them a shout out. Those we've given them enough plugs. Those sons of bitches making us look bad because they do it. Again, we were talking about, how we think it's like, oh man, look at the 135 hours. They do a show of that length every single week.
Plus Patreon material.
Insanity.
Yeah, definitely check them out if you haven't. Also, I want to thank Gabe Sapolsky, which I did not expect to be saying, but he gave our show a big signal boost multiple times over the past few years, and I really think he's definitely increased our profile. So thank you, Gabe. It's very, very kind of you, especially we're not always so kind back. I feel like we're fair. I think even Gabe would admit we're pretty fair. I to this day still think that Gabe, if anything, he's almost underrated. I think his booking at that time. I think he did a great job. But your commentary, thank you, Gabe.
Well, I think we've also been two people that, I mean, the number of times I've had to say on people on Twitter, be like, oh, that Gabe commentary. And I will continue to say one of the big things I've learned from this rewatch so far is like, Gabe is not even the bottom 3 in worst Ring of Honor commentators in the first year.
Yes, it's true, but yes, no. I think he actually had a lot of strengths as a commentator. He had some weaknesses as well.
Yeah, I would say with Gabe, if we're just getting to his commentary, I don't know. This thank you turns into a strict evaluation of his commentary.
We're transitioning to doing our job. You know what I mean?
I would say like Gabe had some like definite strengths and weaknesses. Like obviously he's not a natural commentator, but there's some commentators where it's almost like you don't notice them. And Gabe's a kind of a guy where on commentary you notice him, and half the time it's for good reasons and half the time it's bad. Like he's a guy where he takes a lot of shots and he misses some, but he hits some too. Where I would say, like, compared to a guy like Doug Gentry, who's the color guy, where like Doug, very rarely did he say something stupid, but very rarely did he say something that added to the show. He was just kind of a neutral presence. So I can kind of in some ways sympathize for the guy that's like putting himself out there more and also making more mistakes, because maybe I relate to that in my life. But no, I think I'm really thankful though, Matt, that you like all those guys that you mentioned. They're all definitely people we should thank. And in terms of, and you know, Gabe is not the only person involved in indie wrestling or even in Ring of Honor that has mentioned the show. And I just want to say that, like, much like the Doughboys podcast, Through the Years can't be bought. And all I can pledge is we're going to give our honest opinions, and I am sure sooner or later we will say something, if you listen long enough, that pisses off pretty much anyone. But I will just say that we come by our opinions honestly. We're not trying to hurt anyone's feelings. And also, I think, like, I think you are too, very hyper aware that, like, it's just two people's opinions. Like, I never predisposed to think that, like, we speak for the majority of people or anyone but ourselves. Like, I think some people are like, you know, can you believe this man? Like, blah, blah, like, just, I don't think we ever speak with a very, like, authoritative voice where we act like this is the way it's been for everybody.
No, and I don't think anyone's ever accused us of that. So I think we do a pretty good job of seeming that way. But I have to be honest, I am on the AEW payroll, and that's why I talk a lot about the 18 to 49 demographic. Which nobody not on the AEW payroll has ever paid attention to. So that's a Twitter joke, I guess.
I'm on the kids Nickelodeon payroll, which is why I'm definitely only talking about things that from now on that appeal to, like, the 3 to 5 demographic. So we're going to be talking a lot later about the Wiggles halfway through the show. It's going to be a weird diversion, but I think we'll make it work.
Is that the popular thing right now?
Honestly, my niece is, like, aged out of chilled long ago. So, like, my finger is so off the pulse of what the kids are into, Matt. Like, around Kim Possible is the last time I was like, hey, I'm learning through this kid what kids today are watching. Like,
yeah, you know, I think it's fine. I don't think you need to know. I think it's until you have children, Trevor, I think you're good being unaware of that sort of thing.
So this has gone on longer than I thought. I've been rambling.
The point is, thank you everybody. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I mean, the reason we do the show is because we enjoy doing it, but it's the nicest bonus to know that we're not just doing Into a Vacuum, and it's not just two people listening, and that people genuinely enjoy it. So thank you so much. And we'll keep doing it till it's not fun anymore, or until this era of Ring of Honor stops being good, which I guess would mean not being fun anymore.
Yeah, like, this is the other thing. You gave a disclaimer about, you know, we're going to say things that piss people off, but, like, at the end of the day, like, we're doing the show because we love Ring of Honor during this era, and, like, we're mostly going to say good things. Like,
yeah,
it's so I don't know how. It's probably going to be a while before I piss anybody off with any of my analysis, because I enjoy this.
And people sometimes have asked me, like, how long is the show going to run? And I would say, like, at our current pace, forever. But, like, in terms of what shows we cover, and I think we've never set a firm limit. But the thing, I guess we've never really revealed this before, but I think the thing we would say is we kind of have in place probably, like, we have all the shows, like, we've acquired, like, digital copies of everything, because I sold a lot of my DVDs of shows through the end of 2007. We kind of consider that, like, and I think after that we'd probably have to have a discussion of where we want to go. But I think we've both agreed that, like, I don't think we have any interest in covering Ring of Honor, like, past the Gabe era at the latest. Like, I don't have any personal interest in really covering, no offense to some of the, I mean, there was some good stuff there, but, like, the Adam Pearce era of Ring of Honor is just not something, like, I would be covering, I don't think, ever. And
if we did, I mean, that would be it. Like, I don't think we'd go much into, like, Sinclair or anything like that. But, like, let's say we did go to, like, the end of 2008. like, I'm not saying we're going to do that, but let's say we did. I feel like at this rate, we're talking about another, like, legitimately 10 years, right?
Yeah. I
Like,
mean,
not even exaggerating, right?
yeah, this would be so in terms of like people who ask that question, I understand the curiosity and hope that gives you some idea of where our heads are at. But like, if you're worried about the show ending, unless, it could end at any time for whatever reason, one of us decides it's just not fun anymore. But like in terms of content, like at the rate we're going, just covering like peak Gabe Sapolsky booked era Ring of Honor should take us like most of our adult lives. So I wouldn't worry.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. So, Matt, as always, we cover these shows. Sometimes there's news that happens between the Ring of Honor shows. There's just one or two pieces of news that happened between the last Ring of Honor show and this one. But one of them is, I think, super interesting. And it's not like a secret. People have heard about it in the past. But I think it's, for people that didn't come out during this era, it might be a surprise. And it's just a really interesting story. So this is from the Wrestling Observer. Dave Meltzer writes, a really strange story is that Fumihiko Uwai, who Dave doesn't say this, but this would be the booker of New Japan Pro Wrestling at this time. He tried to put together a deal to get Samoa Joe to drop the Ring of Honor belt to Hiroshi Tanahashi this past month at a Korakuen Hall show. New Japan was willing to pay $6,000 for the title change, but both Joe and Gabe Sapolsky turned down the deal. I can't understand it, Dave writes. For one thing, neither Joe nor the Ring of Honor title have any history in Japan, so to have a title change right off the bat really would mean Tanahashi hasn't won anything of value. The idea would be Tanahashi would then drop it back after a month or so. Sapolsky felt that after keeping the title on Joe for so long that it made no sense to have a title change overseas, and he didn't mark out over the idea of a New Japan guy holding their belt. New Japan felt that since they sent Shinya Makabe to Los Angeles to put over Joe, and Dave writes in brackets, something only the most hardcore of New Japan fans would even ever be aware of, since it was never acknowledged or any clip shown on TV, that Joe should return the favor. Joe actually has never worked for New Japan except for its Los Angeles tapings. So, Matt, yeah, like, it's crazy to think that, knowing what Tanahashi would become, like, we talk about, Joe versus Kobashi in 2005, and eventually he'd wrestle Misawa and Noah. Like, we could have had a Joe versus Tanahashi match for a title in 2004, and New Japan offered $6,000. I don't know how much of that would have been to just Joe or to Ring of Honor or what, but it's crazy. And I got some more to add to it first, but just like, do you remember this? Like, and for those who are wondering, the Shinya Makabe thing, I think we've covered it a little bit. Joe was like a trainer at the LA dojo New Japan had at this time, and they had a brief local TV show with matches there. And in fact, I think we recently covered like a thing where Dave wrote in the Observer how they were ending the show, and Dave said from me watching it was weird because it felt like more of a commercial for Ring of Honor than it did New Japan. And I believe a match there was Joe defending the title, the Ring of Honor title, an official defense against Shinya Makabe, who of course became Togi Makabe in modern New Japan. But just what a weird thing.
Yeah, I don't remember it at all. Didn't know about it at the time. Wasn't following it closely enough to know about it. Did you?
I remember, yeah, and actually, I went back today and watched part of Samoa Joe's 2004 Ring of Honor shoot interview that his straight shooting release that he recorded, I just think 2 or 3 months before this probably, and he actually said they wanted him to drop the title to Shinya Makabe at that show, and they asked him. He said, "No, I can't do it. Ring of Honor's invested too much into me, and they wouldn't want this, and they've been good to me." Then they asked him a second time, "Would you drop the title?" He still said no. So they said, "Fine, you can beat him." And then they came back with this $6,000 offer, which he doesn't name Tanahashi by name, but in the shoot interview, he references like a big amount of money he had to turn down, which I have to assume that it was this story. And it was really interesting in the shoot interview because he talks about, he was like, yeah, I would be working for New Japan, a few months ago, and the only holdup is me holding the title because I can't lose. And then the interviewer asked him a question, and I thought this was really interesting. It wasn't Gabe doing the interview, but I wonder if this was a question someone there had written to ask. And they asked Joe, like, do you think New Japan is asking you and their interest in you is more based on you or the idea of the Ring of Honor title? And he says, sometimes I think it's the Ring of Honor title, sometimes not. But looking at the fact that New Japan did not book him like after the championship, after he lost the title, it really does feel like, and Joe in the shoot says, that New Japan's mindset was basically they wanted the credibility of having like a US title on some of their younger guys, and the WWE titles obviously weren't available to them, and the NW titles weren't available. They weren't working with TNA at this time, and so they deemed Ring of Honor as like the biggest gettable title they could get their hands on. And definitely, like, I don't know this for a fact, but just looking at how Joe never really got a shot in New Japan, it does really feel like, reading the story, that they just were more interested in, could we get this title from this guy?
Yeah, it's also worth noting New Japan of 2004 was not the New Japan of 2020, nor was it the New Japan of 1994. Like, the 2000s were kind of a down period for New Japan. In fact, I don't know what the, and they might have had the best business of any company in Japan. I'm not sure, but it was also considered just like a down period for Japanese wrestling in general. I know there was plenty of great stuff, but it didn't get the level of attention that it had gotten in the previous era or that it gets now. I feel like actually the promotion that got the most attention, at least around America, and maybe it was just because of how Dave Meltzer covered it at this time, was actually Noah. So when ROH started booking the Noah guys in 2005, that was treated as a much bigger deal than this was. And I don't know enough about like what the comparative businesses were doing between Noah and New Japan in 2004, but I just know what the perception was here, and it was that Noah was a bigger deal.
Noah, I think there was a brief. It might have been a 2 or 3 years after this, but there was definitely a time period where Noah definitely felt like had even overtaken business-wise New Japan briefly, when New Japan was on a real low ebb. And like you mentioned, different ownership for New Japan at this era, different booking, different everything. And in fact, the era, people celebrate now the Gato era, the Tanahashi Okada era. One of the reasons why that is celebrated is because it is largely seen as creatively and like business-wise digging New Japan out of a hole that this era was digging for them, or I guess climbing out of a hole that this era was digging for them. So yeah, and maybe one of the many things you could say points to a problem with New Japan this era is the fact that they had someone that would seem like a natural fit for New Japan, who was working in their LA dojo, who just is an insane talent in his prime, and they didn't seem to have any real serious interest in this guy, in Samoa Joe. Like, just staggering.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have much more to say than that.
Yeah, and the other news story, Matt, just a little tidbit, which was Dave mentioned the Observer, that there was plans, and this actually happened. I actually watched a clip of it today. Rocky Romero got booked by New Japan back when New Japan was shoot fight crazy into a shoot fight with another wrestler, Masahito Kakahara. And they actually had a shoot fight. I watched clips of this. I know Dave wrote in the Observer at the time. He didn't know if this was a shoot or like a work shoot. But Rocky Romero loses by knee bar. But I think it happened in October of this year. But it's interesting that like Rocky Romero would have a shoot fight like during the same time. And as Dave wrote in the Observer, he thought it would be a bad idea because Rocky Romero apparently got legitimately knocked out during his match on the show we're going to cover today. And right around the same time, they were like, yeah, New Japan wants him to go do a shoot fight. But that brings us to the show proper. That would be Ring of Honor Gold, named for Gold because, of course, this is the 50th show, the 50th anniversary. Let me just see. Oh God, I am off because normally I start these shows with the date and the attendance, and I put it in the wrong spot. Ring of Honor Gold took place October 15th, 2004 at the Montgomery County Fairgrounds in Dayton, Ohio, in front of a reported crowd of 525 fans. this was a show, Matt, where uh, it was a weird show for Dayton because this was basically a make or break show for Dayton. As we'll go to the Torch, they wrote, Ring of Honor booker and promoter Gabe Sapolsky says Dayton, Ohio has one more chance to become a regular Ring of Honor stop. Yes, we will go where the fans want us enough so that we can break even on a show, he tells the Torch. Honestly, October 15th is a last chance for Dayton. We did well there last time, but needed another 100 to 200 people. If we get the numbers we need to break even on this show, we will be back. If we don't, then unfortunately we won't be back. I really hope the people come out because it's always a great crowd in Dayton. Last time those people were on their feet for 40 minutes for the Punk versus Joe match, and then they were still loud and on their feet for the following match. It's real frustrating when you have a great crowd like that, but need 100 to 200 more people to make the show financially possible. We are always looking for new places to run. We just need the right kind of support. So, yeah, I forgot the exact attendance for the last show. The previous show they had in Dayton was the World Title Classic, the first Punk Joe 60-minute draw, and I think that did like around 400 people. And luckily, this show did in fact do that 525, and in fact, Gabe would talk to the Torch again right after the show, and I'll go back to the Torch. Ring of Honor promoter Gabe Sapolsky says after recent strong attendance in both Chicago and Dayton, he considers both home markets for Ring of Honor. Dayton drew around 500 and Chicago drew around 700, and Gabe says, we had tremendous crowds each time in Chicago and Dayton that came to have fun and give their support to the performers and to the Ring of Honor product. Sapolsky says, they were very enthusiastic and pushed the guys to work even harder in the ring. We all really enjoy the trips there and have nothing but fun. We had some of our most memorable matches and moments in Chicago and Dayton and plan to add to those in 2005. Ring of Honor is also claiming that they did record merchandise sales in Dayton and Chicago. Matt, it's kind of funny, like, that this was the show that did the big attendance that, like, saved it, because if you look at the card, it's probably one of the, from, like, I would just say, like, the least sexy from, like, if you just consider where the name value of these guys were in 2004. It's one of, like, the least sexy cards Ring of Honor had put on, I would say, anywhere of the year.
Yeah, I can see that. I guess what it just shows is that the reputation of the brand over the summer really clawed its way back to being something that people really wanted to go out of their way to see. You know, they went to see Ring of Honor. They went to see, you know, just Samoa Joe and CM Punk and Homicide were considered just stars in their own right. So it's sort of like, you know, a WWE show at the time where it's like people are just showing up to see the names, you know, the matchups themselves. You know, they make a big difference for a company like ROH, but people will still go even to see those stars, even if the matchups are not top of the line matchups.
And I wonder how much of it is that maybe word of mouth from the 60-minute draw going to Dayton, and how much of it might be even, like, I wonder if Gabe even, I doubt it, but maybe even Gabe saying, like, look, if the show doesn't draw this time, we're never coming back here. Like,
could make a difference. I think it's also just, you know, they had a reputation. I mean, listen to our last, like, 10 podcasts. They had a reputation of putting on good shows all the time, and they did. So people who went to ROH shows got their money's worth.
And it's crazy. Like, again, it shows the depth where they were able to. Someone wrote, I think, in a live report to PW Insider, like, all the people they were missing. This person wrote no Briscoes, which, of course, maybe people didn't know at the time, but the Briscoes were going to be gone for a long time. But it still felt like a recent loss at this time. No Cabana. He was in the UK at this time on his first excursion there, I think. No Bryan Danielson. He was, I think, in Japan. No Low Key. No John Walters even defending the Pure title. No Ricky Reyes. So no tag team. Rocky Romero was there, but no Ricky Reyes. No Julius Smokes even. So, I mean.
So sad.
But maybe in a way, the most impactful loss on this double shot was no Steve Corino, because one of the big hooks for this entire weekend, it was this show and the next night in Chicago, which will be our next show, was it was supposed to be Steve Corino's return for the first time in around like a year to in-ring action for Ring of Honor. Of course, he made his like just an angle return at Glory by Honor 3, coming to CM Punk's aid. But this was supposed to be, he was supposed to be in the 6-man tag main event we're going to talk about tonight, and he was supposed to wrestle Samoa Joe for the Ring of Honor World title the next night. And because that he had to pull out and we'll go into why in just a second. That's why we got Joe versus Punk 2. It was never supposed to be a trilogy. There was never supposed to be a second 1 hour draw. That was all on the fly. Gabe feeling like we had to do and we'll get into it in way more detail in the next episode because there's a lot to go through there. But like Gabe felt like we had to give a big replacement to that. But pretty wild. And actually, I can go through it right now. Carino actually gave a reason why he had to pull out of these shows. If I can just scroll up to find it. Oh, yeah. Carino issued a statement regarding his removal from Ring of Honor's Dayton and Chicago events earlier this month. Carino writes, "To the Ring of Honor management and fans, much to my dismay, Mr. Hashimoto from 01 was forced to pull me off this weekend's Ring of Honor shows in Dayton and Chicago. With recent injuries to Shinjiro Otani, Masato Tanaka, and then last night with Tetsuhito Takaiwa, pardon me if I'm mangling the pronunciation, and Nahiro Hashikawa, he decided that he needed everyone he could for this weekend's important shows. Jason the Legend was supposed to be my replacement for the weekend shows, but we were told this morning that he will not be able to make it to Japan until October 19th. I am very upset that I cannot make this weekend's Ring of Honor shows. I was looking forward to having my first Ring of Honor World title match with Samoa Joe and getting back to the Midwest for the first time in way too long. But 01 is where my contract is written, and I have to listen and respect my boss. I just wish the notice would have been much sooner. I want to publicly apologize to Gabe and Kerry Silkin and also to the whole locker room in addition to all of the great Ring of Honor fans that were coming this weekend. I will no doubt 100% be at the Ring of Honor show in Philadelphia on December 26th and hope to return to Ring of Honor even sooner if possible. Once again, from the bottom of my heart, I am sorry." And he, in fact, was on the December 26th show.
And he, in fact, was sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it was out of his hands. This wasn't like some of the other sometimes no-shows. This sounds like very much like just he got told, like, no, we need you here. And like he said, like, Steve Carino's main wrestling job at this point was he was like worked in the office and was a major, like the top foreigner in 01 when they were a bigger promotion than they are today. I believe they just announced recently that they were either in financial trouble or going out of business, although they might have been saved. I didn't quite look into it enough, but yeah, so another thing that completely changed this card. And then finally, Matt, before we get into the show itself, one thing we always love is when listeners have live thoughts or little things that maybe we wouldn't know. And a listener who's done this before, a great listener, Michael Laney, he wrote in an email to us at throughtheyears@gmail.com, ThROH, if you want to do the same. And he wrote a few interesting live report notes from this show. He wrote, "The thing that stands out to me the most about this show is that originally it was supposed to be Steve Carino in the main event six-man tag. I talked to a guy in line that was attending his first Ring of Honor show because he was a Carino fan. He also knew that he heard one half of the Pitbulls was going to be there and was thinking he was going to see Gary Wolf in action as well. He was bummed when I broke the news to him, but I think the guy enjoyed the show since I would see him at all the Dayton Ring of Honor shows for a few years thereafter. Anyways, you may find this to be incorrect when doing your research, but if memory serves me correctly, Carino's replacement in the six-man tag was a mystery heading into the show. During the show itself, there was no announcement at all about who the mystery man was going to be, and the reveal was just Jimmy Jacobs coming out with the rest of the team like it was no big deal, and I can confirm, I think Michael Laney is right on about that. I think it was a mystery, and then it was just like, hey, it's Jimmy Jacobs pulling double duty.
And I can confirm it was no big deal.
Michael continues in the email. From the merch side of things, I recall World Title Classic as being the most recent DVD release that was available. I also purchased Volume 1, Issue 1 of the Ring of Honor magazine, which featured the headline, Samoa Joe's title reign in jeopardy? Along with such compelling articles as John Walters Brings It Home, new tag champs Rocky Romero and Ricky Reyes, plus noted features on Generation Next and Jay Lethal. And before I get into the end of his email, I should note that you were talking to him through email and you got him to send screen caps of this magazine, and it looks amazing. I had no idea Ring of Honor had a magazine, and certainly not as early as like late 2004. And this thing, I kind of wish we had a copy of it. Yeah, this thing looks amazing.
Well, he gave us the closest thing to a copy, where he gave us just the huge, just like tons of pictures from it. I'd be very surprised if I found out there was more than one issue of this, but at the same time, I'm very surprised that there's one issue of this, so I may just be, maybe there's like 20, I don't know, but They had a whole list of they had a whole table of contents. I'm looking at these pictures right now. They had a whole list of the publisher. It was C&T Publishing, for the record. Editor, a photo editor. Looked like they had some color photos. They had an article about Generation Next. All about Ricky, all about Jay Lethal, all about Dunn and Marcos, a list of great matches with write-ups and stuff. Some nice photos of the wrestlers. It was good stuff.
Yeah, I remember talking to you after he showed us this, and I was thinking the only reason I could think of having a magazine this early, I mean, maybe the opportunity just fell in their hands, but if I remember correctly, I think Gabe's early ECW tenure was started by helping to do the program. I might be wrong that, but I think I remember doing the Feinstein episode, learning that that was part of his early days of ECW, was working with creating the programs and stuff for ECW.
Yeah,
so,
like a newsletter almost, right?
Yeah, so I don't know how much or if he was involved with this magazine at all, but definitely, I could see him at least being kind of open to the idea of a magazine being a good thing for an up and coming indie, because that's kind of his roots was, working on one of them for ECW so early on. So
yeah, I have to say they didn't get super creative with it. The all about Jay Lethal part is just this was his first match. This was a big match that he won. He used to be in Special K. Here's his record. It wasn't it wasn't like those old WWF or PWI profiles where they added all these character flourishes and stuff. Yeah. Or here's what Jay Lethal does on a day off. It wasn't anything like that.
We needed them to go after Mag style and have someone write an article about Jay Lethal pretending to be his mom.
Yeah,
Jay Lethal's mom. 5 things you never knew.
Yeah, fake interviews. The rockinest things that Dunn and Marcos have ever done.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Then you could read it on Joe versus the World.
Oh, God. Going back, so the end of Michael Lenny's email, and this is the part, I mean, I like this whole email. Again, if you have any of these personal anecdotes, I can never guarantee we'll read them, but I always love hearing this stuff. But Michael ends, I just love this part. My biggest personal memory from the show was my brother's interaction with Homicide. My brother was 8 years old at the time and was front row wearing a backwards bandana because he was trying to look cool like his favorites, the Rottweilers. Homicide saw my brother, rubbed his head, grinned, and told him that he looked cute. I always thought it was funny to see something that seems so out of character for Homicide. And I don't think that makes the DVD, probably for obvious reasons, but I just love that Homicide, when he was trying so hard to get heel heat during this era, broke character and was hey, you cute little kid, you little 8-year-old, that is just those are the kind of things that just make me think, you know what, indie wrestling's pretty cool sometimes, just stuff like that.
Well, a true traditionalist would be no, you're supposed to be mean to the children. Heels.
If Jim Cornette had cared about Ring of Honor at this time, he'd be doing a 20-minute podcast segment talking about how Homicide was destroying the business by telling an 8-year-old that he looked cute.
He was just on the previous ROH show.
Yeah, but I don't think he was interested.
Fair enough.
So finally, we can get to the show proper. We open backstage on. Boy, this took me back, Matt. Dave Prazak with it's the bleach blonde dye job that I feel every third person in 2004 had. Dave Prazak is sporting it. He walks over to Homicide and Rocky Romero. He tells them he's going to need to do promos with them after a few matches. Into the car, he's going to need to record them with them. Homicide screams at him to get the fuck out of there. And Matt, that's the entire segment. It's 30 seconds. I don't think we see Dave Prazak again until intermission. And he doesn't do the interviews with Homicide and Rocky Romero. This has no payoff. It's just
character building. Homicide and Rocky Romero are not happy, and that's all we need to know.
Yeah. Elsewhere backstage, Matt Striker says he's back where they appreciate wrestling, not like on the East Coast where they want you to bounce off the walls and kill yourself. Striker then says he's going to win the 4-way tonight, and he says the fans in the East are number one in his book. And as he says that, he holds up a middle finger, and it's probably
holds up a million fingers. That's Matt Striker's new gimmick, the man of many fingers.
I love. he holds it right in the middle, and he probably didn't intentionally do this, but it's like perfectly between his like unibrow. It's like dead center, right covering his nose.
Give him a little bit of credit. Maybe he did know how to do that.
If so, honestly, he's had a few good matches. Maybe one of the best moments of Fat Striker's Ring of Honor career, if that was intentional. and I'm not necessarily being glib, even though I really enjoyed that. Next, we go live to In the Building, where CM Punk makes his entrance to his music. He gets a nice pop. On commentary, Gabe and Mark Nolte welcome us to Ring of Honor's historic 50th show. Punk grabs a mic in the ring.
By the way, before you go on, this is, just as someone who's watched all these shows, this was notable because it was an unusual production technique for them. Usually ROH in this era would not speak over entrances ever at all. And if they were going to say, like, welcome to the show, it would be once the match starts. This time they did it during Punk's entrance, and I wasn't sure why. Like, was it incorrectly placed? Like, it was bizarre to me because it just was so out of line with their usual approach. And whenever that happens, it's noticeable. I mean, it's not a big deal, but just like since we're microanalyzing these shows, that stood out to me.
Yeah, and when you watch 50 shows, like you said, there may have been one, but if so, I can't remember them ever starting a show where like the commentary talked before like the first match had the bell ring.
In the early days, they would, but definitely by 2003, they went to the mode of like there's entrances. And then we talk over the matches, and that's it. And sometimes they would talk over promos, I guess, if the promos were bad or hard to hear.
Yeah. It was not like a US TV style presentation where it's like the show opens and the second like you're in the building, the commentators are like welcoming you to the show. Like they talking about like what you're going to see tonight. It's just, like the welcome starts when the first match starts. But going to this segment, Punk grabs the mic. He gets a chant before he even says a word. He's really over. I think the last time they're being there having the 60-minute Joe Punk match, Punk seems like noticeably more over there in Dayton now because of since the last show. Punk says this is the 50th Ring of Honor show, and while he'd like to think he's left his mark on Ring of Honor shows with a lot of different moments he's proud of, there's one moment he isn't proud of, and then Punk goes into mentioning that the last time he was here in Dayton, he and Samoa Joe went to a 60-minute draw. Just mentioning that gets another nice pop from the local fans, but then Punk talks about he's still angry at Homicide for ruining what should have been a special night that night by causing a scene after that match for people that don't remember. At the end of that match, the crowd was chanting for 5 more minutes, and Homicide, who was just early on in his new heel run, comes in. He steals the fancy, and by fancy I mean ugly, new Ring of Honor title that Joe had been presented by Les Thatcher right before the start of the match. He basically just shits on everything and prevents them from doing 5 more minutes by just being an asshole. So Punk is still mad about that. Punk says he needs momentum heading into his rematch with Samoa Joe tomorrow night in Chicago, so he's going to work twice tonight. He says the 50th first show in Ring of Honor history will be in his hometown tomorrow, and that will crown a new Ring of Honor world champion. And then Punk ends the promo by demanding Homicide come out, cue Homicide's music, cue Homicide coming out to the ring with Rocky Romero, cue the match, which is Homicide with Rocky Romero defeated CM Punk via pinfall in 17 minutes, 15 seconds after a chair shot followed by a lariat to the back of the head. Matt, this is Punk and Homicide's third match in Ring of Honor against each other. And I believe this is probably, I think, their last match in Ring of Honor against each other. The first one was at Round Robin Challenge 2 in 2003, which I think, at least I remember being like a good, not great match that was a real fast sprint. Then I remember their next match was, I think, at the Last Stand early in 2004. And I think, at least, again, I remember kind of not as good as that, a little bit slower, but not in a good way, kind of disappointing. What did you think about kind of the third match of, I wouldn't necessarily call it a trilogy, but I mean, I guess it's 3 matches. What did you think about this third match we're getting from Punk and Homicide here in Ring of Honor?
This is, we talk about, it's always fun to discover hidden gems. It's hard, it's weird to say that it's match between 2 of the biggest stars in ROH history is a hidden gem, but it's not like anyone talks about this match. And I would say it was probably I would almost go as far as to say it was the best opener ROH had ever done until this point, as far as an opening match. I'm trying to think back to the good opening matches they've done. There was Bryan Danielson against Christopher Daniels from the Round Robin Challenge in 2002. There was Bryan Danielson against Jay Briscoe from Final Battle 2003. There was a very well-liked Death Before Dishonor 2 Chad Collyer, Rocky Romero match that I didn't think was that special. This match was really, really, really good. It in some ways it was like their first match in that they just like went for it, like they didn't really hold back. And the difference between this match and that match is that this match had a flow. It was less sloppy. It was longer, so they told more of a story. It wasn't just like big move, big move, big move. Although they did do a lot of big moves, and they really kept at quite a pace. You know, they started off throwing bombs. Actually, it started off with probably the worst spot of the match, which was a back body drop by Punk that looked like Homicide almost wouldn't get over, but he did. From that moment on, it was just like they were on fire. You know, the early part of the match was big moves, like CM Punk suplexing Homicide from the crowd over the guardrail onto a chair. Then Homicide selling his back. You know, Punk hits a big power bomb, Enziguri, face wash. He does a dive onto Romero and Homicide because remember Julius Smokes is not there. There's just lots of big moves. Punk even gets Homicide in a torture rack at one point, but he breaks it up because Romero is blocking the ref, and that kind of lets Homicide attack Punk's knee and take him to the floor. And then Homicide starts working on Punk's neck, and that kind of gives a story to the match. You know, Romero still gets involved a little bit more. At one point, Homicide pokes CM Punk's eyes because that is something that ROH does in every match now. And then after he does it, he like points to his head, like the wrestler intelligence spot. Like I poked him in the eye, smart. And Nolte actually was sarcastically was like, "Oh yeah, it takes a lot of intelligence. Einstein used to use that move," and I actually enjoyed that. I actually enjoyed Nolte making fun of the idea that it was really clever to poke someone in the eyes. But once that happened, when we got toward the finish, there were a lot of really good spots. Punk did an overhead belly-to-belly for 2. Then he blocked a pile driver, got a backslide. Homicide then hit the pile driver, but Punk's arm was under the ropes. Punk blocked the top rope Rana and then hit a Pepsi twist, but like a really high-impact one, like way more intense than usual for 2. Homicide hit an ace crusher for 2. Punk escaped the cop killer, actually went for one of his own, but Homicide blocked it, and Romero got up on the apron to distract the ref so Homicide could grab the bell and cheap shot Punk with it. And Punk kicked out to a huge pop. I have to say, if you want a really big pop in a match, have someone kick out of a belt shot. You really can't go wrong with that. It was the tag team title belt, for the record. That was the belt that was there. So then Homicide went for a Pepsi plunge, but Punk fought out and went for one of his own. But Romero distracted again, and Punk went and decked him. And Homicide then hit Punk in the back of the neck with a chair. Then he hit the lariat and got the pin. And I wrote down they had me. Even I was mad about that ending. I was like, oh man, those cheaters. But I mean, this was definitely an indie wrestling match. It was lots of big moves, very fast paced, all action. But it told a good story, I think, with CM Punk and his neck, and getting screwed over by the Rottweilers cheating, and the CM Punk neck stuff played into the main event also. So I thought this was a damn good match. I was racking my brain trying to think of an opener up until this point that I like better than this match, and I can't think of one. I think the show peaked here, which is the downside of it. But this was a really, really, really good match.
I would put this on the level in terms of openers of the only one I would put on this level I would say is the Danielson-Daniels one from Round Robin Challenge. I think that was another one where I'd kind of put that in that same round where I would call this match a banger, Matt. I think that's the best word to describe it. But it's easily the best of the 3 matches they've had in Ring of Honor, and it's a better version of the Round Robin Challenge 2-1 because that one was another one where they just were keeping a really good pace right from the start and a lot of action. But in trying to quantify how much I enjoy this match, I wouldn't say it's you absolutely have to go out of your way to see. But I would say it's like 3 3/4, 4-star like opener that's just really satisfying. And I think the best way to describe it for me is like a lot of wrestling matches, and this is a good thing, there's peaks and valleys, or like if you're going to rate your enjoyment or the intensity of a match, it might start at like a 4 and go up to a 9 and then go down to a 7 and then peak at the 10 if it's really great, or it might whatever, stuff like that. But how I would describe this match is it basically right from the bell, it's like an 8 out of 10, and it just stays at an 8 out of 10 for 17 straight minutes. Like it's just consistently like a very good pace, consistent action. Like it just never lets up. And it's just really cool to see a match like that where it's not like, I think if you are just weaned on like modern wrestling, like indies and AEW and stuff like that, where you'd be going, well, this isn't quite as fast as there, but it's just, they never really take a break. They never really slow it down. And it's just, like you said, it's not a super heavy story, but Homicide's working of the neck, it does have a payoff. And so much of his offense is just naturally predisposed to always telling the next story. And he hits a pile driver in this match on CM Punk, where like the crowd like groans because it looks like he killed CM Punk. And it's just a really good, like action heavy, frenetic, fast paced match. And another interesting thing I think that you kind of touched on is like, I was looking back at my reviews of their first 2 matches, and both times I was like, oh, these matches are kind of botchy. And you mentioned that point early on where in this match where like Punk is going for a back body drop and it looks like Homicide isn't going to get over, and like they just kind of muscle their way through. And there was a few spots in this match where it looked like there was going to be a botch, like especially from Punk, like I think like a gut wrench suplex or something where it looks like he might be having trouble. But every time it's like this was just a night where like they were on, and it was like, nope, like I'm not going to screw up tonight. Because even moments where it looked like, oh, this could go wrong, like it seemed like every time they just kind of gutted it through and pulled off. There is one botch kind of where it looked like Punk was going for a drop kick and he just kind of mistimed it. But to Homicide's credit, he just like jumps on Punk immediately to the point where it's almost hard to tell it's a botch completely. And yeah, I really like you mentioned, I like that they did the interference twice. Like I liked that they went to the gimmick belt shot, which that entire crowd bought as the finish and got a really big near fall out of it. And then they went back to the chair, because a lot of times, sometimes that would seem like overkill, but I think they got like a really huge, cool near fall that they wouldn't have done if they didn't do that first. And yeah, just really good opener. Like,
yeah, and when you say that CM Punk and Homicide were on this night, I'm going to give you a spoiler alert. CM Punk was on this entire weekend.
Yeah, oh yeah, I hear he does a good match the next night. Maybe, I don't know. Also, Matt, can we just talk about like? I think one thing I would always say about CM Punk is he's kind of has like an audacity to him. Like sometimes he attempts moves that he can't quite pull off, but also sometimes it really pays off for him. Like people always said he's a really self-confident guy in his own abilities. Like there's an audacity to CM Punk being like, he knows he's working the next night doing a 60-minute draw, and he's working double duty on this night. And on this match, like he's giving pretty much, I would describe like maybe if they were in the main event spot on this show, Homicide and Punk would have done like an extra minute or 2 of near falls. But for the most part, I would describe like the effort level they give in this match like a main event level effort level. It didn't feel like they were holding much back or giving you that much of a different match than if this was last on the card. And he's doing this plus another match before he does a 60-minute match the next night. Like,
yeah, this was the weekend of CM Punk. For sure.
This is akin to like, I think there's a match on the first anniversary show we talked about where it's just like a short undercard match and it's not that long. But then I think we learned that, I think it was like the night before he had done the 93-minute match with Chris Hero and IWA Mid-South. Like it just seems like he was a guy at this point where he's like, yeah, I'm just going to go out there and wrestle my ass off. Like, I don't care what I'm doing the next night. I'm going to do it all over again the next night, and just not, I'm not saying not pacing himself, but kind of just, again, I just feel like the audacity he had where he was just like, I can pull it off. I can do that much. And a lot of times he actually could, this weekend he certainly does. Like you said, like he can do it.
Yep.
A couple other quick notes from this. Homicide did come out with the belt that he stole from Samoa Joe, I guess because they needed it for the finish. But it's funny because
that was the belt he hit him with. You're right. I thought it was a tag title belt. My mistake.
yeah, I think that must because it feels like they kind of forgot about that belt for a long time, and maybe they also brought back on this night also because the show he stole it on was Dayton, and we talked about the other show on another show recently about how Gabe was often, like when he was at his best, good at kind of like booking not just show to show but like city to city. So it's kind of like even if you just were there live for the last Dayton show, he's kind of still remembering what was on the last Dayton show. Like, oh, he stole the belt, so the belt's going to come into play on this Dayton show, even if that belt didn't come into play on a lot of the other Ring of Honor shows in other cities between the last Dayton show and this Dayton show. Matt, I think also this is Bobby Cruz's first Ring of Honor show as the regular ring announcer. He, of course, had appeared before when Steve Corino was doing the personal ring announcer gimmick, and he might have even done spot duty during a show when Steven DeAngelis couldn't make it. I don't remember.
Yeah, I feel like there might have been one other show, but I can't say that for sure. But it was definitely noticeable that he was the guy here.
Yeah, and I just checked the other shows just to make sure. But yeah, this is from this point on, he is replaced Steven DeAngelis. He is the regular ring announcer for Ring of Honor.
Okay, got you. Okay, so I see what you're saying. So Steven DeAngelis does not ring announce their shows anymore after this.
Yeah, I watched the rest of the show. I just quickly jumped to taking a peek at the rest of the shows through the end of the year, and yeah, it's Bobby Cruz for all of them. So I think it's safe to assume this is the moment that like.
Wow.
I don't know why, but Steven DeAngelis is probably done in Ring of Honor at this point in the history.
Well, so this ROH Gold marks another milestone because the dude is still the ring announcer of ROH.
Yeah, it makes it easy for him to remember, like, oh, I started the 50th show as a regular. And couple other things just looking at quickly. I guess we should also mention, sometimes I like to mention this when I notice it. I don't always check. This is one of those matches that is available legally for free on the Ring of Honor official YouTube channel. Strangely enough, though, I think it was uploaded like 12 years ago, and it's posted in 2 parts in really shockingly bad video quality, like worse than the quality you would get from a torrented file. And but it is there for free if you want to watch legally and easily just by probably entering Homicide, CM Punk, Ring of Honor into YouTube. You can see it, and it's worth watching. Definitely for free. Absolutely worth watching this match. And finally, Matt, one little moment I really liked on commentary. You mentioned the Einstein line from Nolte. Nolte said at one point during this match, he goes, "Sometimes your courage overrules your intelligence, and we've all been guilty of that at one time or another." And I just wrote in my notes, I have never been guilty of that ever in my life. Like, I am a coward, Matt. I've never been like, boy, my courage really overruled my intelligence today. But
even as a kid, you never did anything like stupidly brave.
I was I would have willingly have been the boy in the plastic bubble if they had let me. Like, if they had made a sequel to that movie that was about a kid being like his parents begging him to leave the bubble. Like, that would have been perfect for my story. I was a very conscientious kid, I'll say. But
I feel like I'm a pretty cautious guy. But there have definitely been a couple moments in my life where I was like, man, that was stupid.
After the match, Homicide, his mouth disgustingly caked with spit, looks into the camera holding the stolen Samoa Joe title belt, and he says he's the real champ, bitch. Rocky Romero gets on the mic, and he tells Punk to not even worry about tomorrow, because tonight he's winning the Ring of Honor World title from Samoa Joe. He and Homicide pose to a mix of boos and cheers. Oh yeah, the other thing I forgot to mention, that Nolte brought this up too, Homicide is 3-0 against CM Punk in Ring of Honor at this point after winning this match, and I don't think Punk gets his win, like one win back in Ring of Honor over him, let alone 3. So it's just kind of they never really had like an extended feud,
and they never had a match in like a real main event slot either. This would probably be the highest profile match they've had.
Yeah, and another interesting thing, you were talking about the differences of the presentation of Ring of Honor in the show. Very rare you get a Ring of Honor show where maybe only this show where you basically get the main event going on first. Like, this is clearly far and away like the highest profile match and what we'll probably argue the best match on the entire show. And obviously you go, well, why would they do it first? But I don't know this for a fact, but the obvious answer seems to be knowing that the main event also has Punk in it, and it's a babyface win in the main event, and this is a babyface loss due to cheating, I have to assume they just thought, if we got to do these matches, we got to do one at the start, one at the end, because Punk's doing double duty, and we should end with the one that's the happy ending. So that's my only assumption there.
But also, when do they ever have a main event match that's just a singles match between two guys, not for a title, without any gimmicks, and without it being a blow-off of a feud?
Yeah, I mean, they did a very little bit of like Homicide and Punk kind of crossing paths, where they had Carino coming in where he came back during Glory by Honor 3, and Punk kind of getting in the middle of Homicide and Carino, and they had, of course, the Scramble Cage Melee, the 3-way where it was Homicide, Joe, and Punk for that incredible title. Who gets to be the icon of Ring of Honor? By the way, something that has never referenced again, I should note, in the shows that have happened since. And Homicide, stole Punk's pin over Joe. So, it's not a feud, but there are at least a couple little things you can drag into the recent history. But yeah, not a feud at all.
Nothing that would ever make them book it as a main event. I think under a normal circumstance, you could see this match going second from the top, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this would be like a perfect and also match. Here's the big main event, and you also get this too. And, not a big feud, but two big names, probably gonna have a good match. Here you go. But we cut to backstage where Chad Collyer tells us that the last time they were here in Dayton, he had the most embarrassing moment of his career. He tapped out to Jay Lethal in a four-way. Chad says he's going to give Jay a lesson of his life. That's the phrase he used. And he's going to make him tap because he has the precision of a physician. Chad keeps almost stumbling over his words, but just kind of barreling through with this weird charisma he has. He says he's going to make Jay get plastic surgery on his ugly face. And then he tells the cameraman, make sure Jay sees this promo. I just wrote in my notes, Matt, this was simultaneously great and terrible.
Yeah, this is actually almost like a famous promo. I've heard people make fun of this for a long time, and even Gabe was like, "How about that promo?" when he comes out later, this is a notably bad, so bad it's good promo for sure. Chad Collyer is quite a character on these promos, which makes it interesting that he's really not one in his matches. You know what I mean? He doesn't really have much personality in the ring, but he has a lot on the promos. The personality is not totally sensical, and his delivery is not. He says words wrong, but he sure does have personality on the promos.
Yeah, he has a lot of charisma, and it's funny too because the character or just what he presents, I don't even know if it's a character, what he presents in promos is a completely different image than his wrestling in-ring image. Because in-ring, he's Chad Collyer, a technical wizard, very serious, studious guy, trained by the Malenkos.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then, on the promos, he's just this sometimes semi-coherent, just full of piss and vinegar, gonna sock you in the face kind of goofball. And it's completely at odds with how he wrestles. But
there's some other problems with Chad Collyer that I guess we'll get to later.
Yeah, there's some definitely problematic Chad Collyer stuff we will address.
It's not all fun and games with Chad Collyer.
Yeah, but first we get our second match on the show. Matt Sydal defeats Trent Acid via pinfall in 8 minutes, 23 seconds using a forward rolling cradle. PW Insider, they had a live report from a man I always like to give credit, named Clint Copenhaver. He wrote a little note on this match where he goes, the crowd seemed unfamiliar with Acid and could not figure out why he got a 5-minute intro. And also that Trent Acid has no more Midnight Express music. Luckily, we did not see very much, if at any, of the intro. I don't know what he did. But, Matt, I would say the story of this match isn't actually the match, it's the commentary. Rarely, if ever, have we heard Ring of Honor commentary bury a wrestler this openly and harshly during a match. Most of this match, eventually they do kind of soft walk back a little bit and go, well, he's done some good stuff. But a lot of this match is Gabe, especially, and Mark Nolte, shitting on Trent Acid, talking about how his gear is ugly, how he doesn't take things seriously, how he has potential, but like they even worked his booking into it recently, like, oh, he was the 4-way king of the multi-man matches, but not anymore. He lost the last one, and they just. Like, I was shocked how much they shit on Trent Acid. And yes, his gear wasn't that much worse than it normally is. It was like a ratty t-shirt with the arms torn off and like the jorts and a big, I guess the ugliest thing would be a white rag, a white towel hanging out of the back pocket of the jorts. And he had like dirty shoes, but they really shit on to the point where it was like, knowing that Matt Sydal wins this, and this was early on for Matt Sydal, I was starting to think like, you're kind of hurting Matt Sydal's win here, because it's going to by the end of the match, it feels less like, oh, Matt Sydal beat a former Ring of Honor tag champ and a prominent name on the indies, and more like, boy, Matt Sydal beat a guy who's on his way out of Ring of Honor and who's apparently hitting hard times. And as far as the match itself, I was kind of distracted by all the commentary, but it was okay. Like, it was less of a match and more just, here's some big spots here or there. I think one thing Trent Acid does, he did some comedy early on, like kind of just goofing on Matt Sydal and psyching him out. And Trent Acid is a guy where I feel like sometimes he has this shtick where he's kind of acting like he isn't taking wrestling seriously. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it borders on like that he just legitimately isn't taking wrestling seriously. And I felt like this kind of walked the line on that. And there were a few big spots, and then they kind of just went to Matt Sydal getting the win from, a quick pin. But for a match that was mostly just, here's a few nice spots, there were 2 spots I thought were really cool. One was Trent Acid catching a moonsault on the outside off the guardrail from Sydal, and then he ran from like one side of the ring to the other to power slam him into a barricade, which I thought looked really cool. Trent Acid did. And then Matt Sydal just hits it absolutely gorgeous later in the match, a Kibrata, where he does like a twist, like a rotation of his body in the middle of it. But for the most part, this was all I remember from this match was those 2 cool spots and just Trent Acid getting buried 6 feet under.
Yeah, I think I took the commentary a little bit different from you in that I just took it as like they were trying to get over Trent Acid's character. As opposed to them being genuine. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but that's how I took it. Rather than them genuinely like shitting on Trent Acid, the person, just that his character was that he was unfocused, that he was dirty, that he needs to get serious again, and that's causing him wins and stuff like that. I guess in wrestling, maybe I should always assume that like there's always truth behind the lies. I don't know, because you are right that he stops getting booking soon, but. I thought his performance in the match was pretty decent, like you said about the not taking stuff seriously. But, this match, it did play into a story of him not taking things seriously. And like you said, the high spots were good. There wasn't much in between them, but there were some good high spots. But you're right. They definitely, if they were trying to get over that Acid was not, his head wasn't in the game, they did lay it on a little bit thick. There was some other funny comedy stuff though. Like I wrote, like the minute at the beginning of the match when Gabe calls Daisy Hayes beautiful and lovely, I immediately had my guard up. Like, oh shit, what's he going to say now? But like, and then later on in the match, Nolte actually called Gabe out on it. And he's like, and Gabe is like, you got to watch out for those lawsuits. Meanwhile, some of the stuff that they say about Acid, like Nolte says, there ought to be a rule you should dress better than the fans, which I think you mentioned. But then when Gabe says that Acid looks like he wandered out of a homeless shelter, I was thinking like, even that you really couldn't say in 2020. Like, I think that would even be pretty problematic, right? Like insulting someone by saying they look homeless. I feel like that's, yeah.
I'm not, you know what, Matt, the tough thing for me is, the bar for problematic things in early Ring of Honor is so high that I kind of get numb to the point where when you say stuff like that, like my gut reaction is, oh, that's not that bad, is it? And then my second reaction is, oh god, like have I grown numb from watching this stuff? Like,
I feel like in 2004 it probably was not considered bad. Like I'm just saying, like now I feel like where you're like shaming someone because of poverty, like I feel like that's be looked at a little bit differently. But I thought Sydal had a good performance here. But you're right. It was just totally a bunch of spots. The ones that you mentioned were cool, and there was not much in between. But it wasn't a long match, so I think if you're watching the whole show, you don't have to skip this. It's fine.
Yeah, and you might be right, actually. Maybe I'm completely misinterpreting this, and the commentary was more putting over a character. I guess why I'm judging it that way maybe is because just knowing the results and knowing that Trent Acid basically gets booked through the end of the year, and then that's it, and he doesn't get booked in anything of any importance. And I think he beats a member of Special K on the next show the next night, but after that he doesn't win another match. Like, it definitely feels like he's kind of getting the Matt Striker treatment, where you can tell that basically after the Joe title shot where he gets injured, it feels like they gave up on him. You know, there are certain guys in Ring of Honor throughout its history where you can tell basically like there's a very distinct line, a moment in time where they're like, well, we tried, we're kind of cutting bait here. And it feels like they hit that for Trent Acid a little while ago, and now we're just kind of seeing the string play out here with him. Like, even now, you know, Trent Acid in 2003, he felt like a guy who had potential in Ring of Honor, who felt like kind of a hot overact, and now he's second from the bottom, putting over the next, you know, big guy, Matt Sydal. He's the next hot prospect.
Yeah, although at the time they didn't even treat Matt Sydal like a hot prospect. Like, he had barely been on the shows. He was just like a guy, and he won this match, so I guess this is how he becomes the next hot prospect.
And even this match, like, he doesn't get like a huge dominant win. It's kind of, he reverses Acid's attempt at his finisher into a pinning predicament and gets the 3. It's not like, oh, he just destroyed Trent Acid. It's like, well, they went back and forth, and he kind of made one good move and got through it. But Matt Sydal will do all right in wrestling. We return backstage for a Samoa Joe promo. He puts over Rocky Romero as a guy who could know his weaknesses because he's a guy who came up in the same dojo as him, learning and doing many of the same things. Joe says the difference between them, though, is while Rocky Romero has always been an exceptional wrestler, Joe has always been the best wrestler. And like a lot of Samoa Joe promos, this was very short, but very, I wouldn't say very sweet. That sound gives a weird implication, but it was an enjoyable, good, to the point, accomplished its goal.
Yeah, I think this is one of Joe's better promos in a while. It was kind of like the promos he was doing like in 2003 or earlier in the year, where he was just really getting over that character. And I think he did a good job of explaining why this matchup is interesting.
Yeah, because some people probably wouldn't know, and he doesn't really elaborate on it, but like they were both working in that LA New Japan dojo while it was open, so obviously they would have more of a familiarity with each other, like in a way that Joe probably wouldn't with a lot of his opponents. So that brings us to match 3. Delirious and Jimmy Jacobs defeated Special K of Angel Dust and Dixie, who were scored to the ring by Lacey and Becky Bayless, and Delirious and Jimmy Jacobs win in 12 minutes, 41 seconds, when Jacobs pins Dixie after he hits the Contra code, which is basically the sliced bread number 2, into kind of a sit-out landing. Matt, you know, this is we had an early performance from Matt Sydal, and usually where Matt Sydal is in this era of indies, Delirious is right there too. So another early performance from Delirious. The gimmick of Special K on a losing streak continues. What'd you think about the match?
Well, this match had some epic commentary, like some really epic commentary. So, like, I mean, that's the highlight for sure. The match I'll do the match itself first. So the match itself, I didn't think was so great. I thought Jimmy Jacobs looked good. I think he's generally looks very good in these matches. He's doing double duty tonight, which it seems like apparently the fans watching this did not know at the time. But I wonder if like the wrestlers did. But Special K came out and they did not have music, nor did they shake hands. So, you know, they must be getting serious. But then there's, a few double team moves, nothing too impressive. They work over Delirious. They're basically playing heels, but heels with more respect. And at this point, Gabe mentions that, like, the legal man will be more of a focus going forward. Gabe, he even says that, like, everyone was influenced by ECW, but back in the old days, the rules were respected and then they meant something. So we're going to get back to that in ROH. And Nolte actually blames Mick Foley for the tag rules being disrespected. I don't get it, but so they're paying attention to the tag rules here. And Deliriously, he's coming back. He does a flurry. He misses an enziguri, and Dixie cuts him off with a clothesline. uh, Angel Dust, he hits like a double stomp to the back of Delirious's head, but doesn't really land it too flushly. And then he misses a blockbuster, which I've never really seen someone miss a blockbuster, but he missed it. And that allowed Delirious to hit like an over-the-shoulder slam. And Jimmy Jacobs gets a hot tag, and it's a good hot tag. He's a real house of fire. Does a bunch of big moves on Dixie. Angel Dust cuts him off from behind. The announcers say they have to break the losing streak tonight because they look so sharp. And as soon as they say that, they're going to lose. So Angel Dust hits like his electric chair driver move on Jacobs. Delirious makes the save. Delirious does a missile drop kick, but Special K double team him. There's like a double team shadows over hell on prettier type move, which was pretty cool. But Dixie pulled Angel Dust out for the save. And then there's a kill the ref chant. So already Todd Sinclair's getting shit. Poor guy. I think it was Todd Sinclair. Maybe it was someone else. But Dixie hit a rock bottom type move. Oh, yeah, it was Sinclair. That's because I wrote Sinclair won't count because he's not the legal man. And that allowed Jacobs to come in and go for the contra code. Dixie escaped the first time, but then Jacobs hit him the second time and won the match. I thought the guys worked hard, but I thought only Jacobs really had a good night. I just thought the match was just okay, maybe even a little bit worse than that. It just didn't click for me. But sorry, go ahead.
Should we do the match first and then treat the commentary like a separate thing? Because I'm wondering.
Okay,
yeah.
Let me just name one thing from the commentary before that, because there's some other stuff on the commentary. But here's the one thing: at the very beginning of the match, Gabe says that Izzy isn't there, and he gets this really serious voice, and he's like, he's not here. And I'm just going to be honest, he's on a bad trip right now. And he said it so seriously, I could not stop laughing.
That was a legit great line I liked from Gabe. That was, honestly, again, how can I not occasionally defend Gabe's commentary where I will acknowledge tons of flaws, but occasionally when I talk about sometimes he swings a lot of times he misses, sometimes he gets a hit. That's an example. He got a hit there, man. He got a hit.
Yeah, like I'm just picturing like Dixie like phoning in sick. It's like, I can't come in right now. I got the flu. It's like, you don't have the flu. All right, man, I'm tripping and it's bad. like how does he know that he's on a bad trip? Like, I don't know. But yeah, that's the case. So, but yes, the other commentary stuff I'll get to after you give your thoughts.
I'll set you up right after I go into. I don't have much to say about this because I think this was a really average match. I thought when it started, I thought the initial early minutes, there's a bit of delirious comedy, but when Special K start to control, I thought it's kind of boring, but I thought it was one of those matches where the longer it went, it kind of kept getting better to the point where by the end I was like, that was middle of the road. That was fine. But considering I started thinking, this is kind of boring. Like, that's not bad to end it. Like, oh, that was okay. That wasn't bad. You mentioned the key spots. I did also really like I think Special K did a double team, like back suplex, flying top rope leg drop combo move, which I thought looked really cool. And like you mentioned, this is something we're going to see multiple times this night. But as Gabe mentioned on commentary, Ring of Honor announced that they were going to start taking the enforcement of the rules and the Code of Honor more strictly again. And so you see multiple matches like this one tonight that seem to have spots specifically put in there to help show that because, yeah, you had Todd Sinclair not counting a big near fall because it wasn't the legal man. And it's interesting because you mentioned how Gabe said that wrestlers don't take the rule seriously because they all grew up on ECW. I think on the last through the years I read a quote from The Observer where Dave said they're going to start taking it more seriously because the thought is too many of these wrestlers aren't paying attention to the rules because they grew up on ECW. So Gabe's saying the exact same thing here. Like, that tells you where Dave got that quote from, because Gabe basically says the exact quote like verbatim during the commentary. But yeah, nothing special much for the match. This is a match where really the most interesting things are the commentary and that the start of this trend of the enforcement of the rules. And it's weird too. I would just say the last little point is, I feel like one kind of quirk, maybe even a negative of Ring of Honor, although it's not really hurting the enjoyment that much. But it seems like both the rankings and the enforcement of the rules, Ring of Honor kind of treats them like people treat weight loss, where it feels like they'll get really strict about it for a few shows, and then slowly it gets a little more lax, and then after like a 6 months to a year, they're like, oh shit. And then they'll try like either a new ranking system or in something like this where it's like, we're going to take the rules really seriously. And then in a few months it's going to be back to the way it was. Like, it feels like it's something they want to do, but they don't want to do it enough to really put their foot down.
The yo-yo diet of rules.
It is, and right now we're seeing the start of a period of Ring of Honor where they're like, well, I ate too much on Christmas. We gotta crack down on these rules again. Ricky Steamboat's getting mad behind the scenes.
This is their 50th show resolution.
And part of me wonders that too, because like I bring up the Steamboat thing. I think there was a thing we read a couple shows ago where they were saying like Ricky Steamboat was trying to impress on the wrestlers, like, take the rules more seriously, like follow the rules, how it can benefit you. I wonder how much of that even might have factored into this. Maybe Steamboat was even telling people like, hey, maybe don't ignore like all the rules. Maybe pay attention to the legal manner. Or I know the thing they were talking about on a show or two ago was like Steamboat trying to tell the guys like, don't interfere right in front of the ref. At least set up a distraction first. And we noticed that really long elimination tag they did, that was one of the first Ring of Honor matches in a while where actually there was lots of interference, but they actually did make an effort to distract the ref, where in so many of matches in the last few months we were going, God, like, the guys just interfere in front of the ref and like don't even attempt to hide it. So
it's funny that they brought in this legend Ricky Steamboat to be like a disciplinarian to the younger wrestlers, like, hey, you gotta follow the rules, man.
Gabe's like playing like the divorced dad. He's like, look, Ricky, they won't listen from me, but if you tell them, they'll listen to you if you do it. They respect you.
That pretty much. I'm just like, it sounds like that's pretty much literally what happened.
Yeah. I could just imagine Gabe like, guy like Homicide. If you don't start hiding the interference, I'm gonna tell Ricky. Look, Ricky's gonna be a lot angry about this than I am. You think I'm the soft one, but
wait until Ricky Steamboat gets home.
Yeah. But anyway, the main event of this segment, and we've spent too long avoiding it. My fault. But Matt, I hyped this on Twitter, and I don't think I'm going to. I'm going to let you tell it. I think, Matt, this is the most misogynistic comment we have heard in 50 episodes of Through the Years on covering Ring of Honor, and think of the ground that covers. Matt, what the hell did Mark Nolte say during this?
Okay, well, I mean, honestly, I didn't even see your tweet, so I don't even know which one you're referring to. But here's what I wrote down. So when he's talking about Lacey and Becky and their like kind of feud, he calls it the little cat fight thing. Then he says, there's a reason WCW dropped the women's division. People didn't want to see women wrestle, and the women were too much of a pain in the ass in the locker room. That's a Mark Nolte quote.
That's the line.
Yeah, so I wrote, holy moly, this guy is something else. Then he immediately follows with, I'm sorry, did I say all that out loud? And I was like, yes, you did. And now we're judging you on a podcast 16 years later. Bet you didn't see that coming. But
rest in peace, Mark Nolte.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm sure he's a good guy. I just like, this commentary was wild, man. Times, it's these are the times we live in. We're going to call this stuff out. But okay, so then later on in the match, Gabe says, look at Lacey. And Mark goes, who cares? And I mean, Gabe, you get 5 stars. He knocked me out. In 2004, Gabe goes, I can't even get it out. He goes, you really have a misogynistic problem there, Mark. I could not believe it. It was amazing.
You didn't see the tweet I wrote. This is how bad Mark Nolte's line was. Gabe Sapolsky calls out Mark Nolte for being misogynistic.
He literally says misogynistic.
He got like Gabe to come to Jesus on this. That's how bad he was. Gabe was like, oof.
Yeah. Gabe's awakening was October, what'd you say? It was 15th, 2004? Was that the date?
Yeah, the 50th show was momentous for learning for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
Bobby Cruz's first regular show, Gabe finally like being pushed too far, the rules coming back. Ooh. Yeah, the one other line, no, the one was just definitely the WCW, like, this is why women's wrestling, like, that was the line. But one other line, Mark Nolte at one point refers to Lacey at ringside. He goes, the unnecessary appendages at ringside. He refers to her just as unnecessary appendages.
It's just amazing, like, that we've been noticing this on all the shows, and our assumption was just sort of like, 2004, they let a lot go. But realizing that all along, Gabe was, like, thinking the same thing we were, sitting next to Mark Nolte, hearing him be, like, say these weird things about women. And, like, to the point where he just had to, like, straight up call it out. And, like, Mark Nolte couldn't do anything about it because this is Gabe's show. He could say what he wants.
And the amazing thing, too, is think about, like, 2002, 2003, we were like, oh, Gabe, one of his biggest flaws on commentary is he's doing, like, the horn dog, regressive Jerry Lawler, like, style drooling over women gimmick. And then not like, remembering or realizing that Mark Nolte, who I think his reputation, like, the way people remember is, oh, the kind of stuffy, serious wrestling historian, would be, like, a far darker, more cynical breed of misogynism was on the way, courtesy of the guy that I only remember as the guy who said, like, he slapped the mustard off of the hot dog. Like,
had any person in the history of pro wrestling, had any man ever been called out on a wrestling show for being a, quote, misogynist before? I feel like this might be the first time that's ever happened.
Ring of Honor secretly the most progressive. No, I'm not going to say that, but I mean, yeah, I can't remember, like, misogyny being a word uttered. That might be one of the first times that the word misogyny in any context has been uttered on a wrestling show.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it's been used since then, but it probably has. But I can't imagine it was used before then.
Yeah, so like, this is two straight matches where I feel like the commentary has been the more interesting thing than the match, but granted, this commentary, pretty interesting if you've been following the saga of Ring of Honor commentary for 50 episodes.
Yeah, it's true that.
After the match, Delirious, he rubs Jimmy's furry boots. Lacey and Becky get into another shouting match, continuing their little feud.
I just have to. I love your attention to detail that you know that you're noting that Delirious rubbed Jimmy Jacobs' furry boots.
Honestly, I was like, when the camera stayed on him rubbing the boots, I was starting to type that as I was watching. I was like, well, they're holding on this. This is going to go somewhere. And then I was just like, oh, it's just going to Lacey and Becky getting into a shouting match. But I had already written it down, and honestly, I was just like, you know what? Not deleting this. Like, this is going in the recap. But the other, I might mention this on the last show, but I think I was intending to, and then I didn't, Matt. This is something I think is really interesting, which is how many shows where, like, Special K was kind of a hotter act, they were getting pushed, they were even tag team champions, where Gabe would say on commentary every time, you know, Special K are full of talented guys. If they would just get off the drugs and take things seriously. And what I love is it's not Gabe's intention. It's obviously he's doing it to set, like, the Lacey angle on the split. But, like, the second he started pushing Special K as, like, look, they're shaking hands or they're getting more serious, is when they also start doing, like, a losing streak gimmick. Like, unintentionally, the story Gabe is creating is basically once Special K, like, start taking things seriously and stop doing drugs, like, that's when their careers went to shit. Like,
yeah, they lost all their self-esteem. Yeah.
Like, the hidden unintentional message of the storyline is, like, drugs are good for your wrestling career. Anyway,
or is it hidden?
Ooh. I'll tell you something that was, speaking of things that were hidden, that brings us to Chad Collyer defeating Jay Lethal via submission in 12 minutes, 51 seconds with the Texas Clover Leaf. Before I get into the match, let's talk about something else. This is quite the eventful show for a B show.
I'm wondering if we should even say this quote out loud.
Yeah, I want to say this is them saying it. So if you, this is something you might not even notice, but I had a hard time not noticing it. Okay, so I'll just say this. Let's go through the story. A long time ago, so I'm not going to name names, but occasionally we get access to little things that didn't make air. We saw a take of a promo Chad Collyer did for this show, never made air, and why it is because it's a promo Chad Collyer cuts and against Jay Lethal for the match tonight, and he calls Jay Lethal a jungle rat, which pretty horrific statement to call a black person. Obviously. And if you watch, the clip is not available. We're not going to show it. We're not going to tell you where it came from. But you can instantly hear someone laughing off camera, and you can hear Gabe immediately go cut, because obviously Gabe knows we are not airing that. And obviously they did a retake, and we got the promo that we covered earlier. So I thought, okay, that's the story behind that. It's a weird little thing. Chad Collyer's problematic, but whatever. Lots of people in wrestling are problematic. We've addressed that a lot recently. So imagine my surprise when during this intro, in the brief clip, they don't show the full entrances of this match or most matches on the show to try and edit it for time. But in the few seconds we see of this Chad Collyer entrance, right at the end of it, he turns directly to the camera and says something basically to the effect of, like I told you before, he's just a jungle rat. Which is both horrible because he said it and it made air, but also you don't even have the context because he's referencing a promo they did not air because he said that thing.
Which just tells you they must have just straight up missed it, because there was no reason why they couldn't have edited that out. It was not a necessary moment. If they had edited that out, it would have changed nothing about the DVD. It seems like they just straight up fast forwarded through the entrance in the editing room. That's what it seems like to me.
And it's crazy because it's not that loud, but it's clear because it's not into a mic, but it's clearly audible. And he looks directly into camera to say, and it's one of those things where if they had edited literally 2 seconds off of this entrance, they would have cut it out because it's just that one sentence. That's it. And they cut him basically right as the thought ends. And it was just like a stunning thing, going into the show and knowing about that promo. The fact that that this made air, just my jaw dropped, and now it's kind of it's weird to have to then review this match. Matt, I thought this wrestling match was okay. I thought this was another match where at the start of it, I thought, this is kind of boring. And then by the middle, I thought, well, it's average, but it's got some good points. And by the end, I thought, oh, this is just outright kind of good, not super amazing. It tells a simple story where, Collyer going after Jay Lethal's leg, that pays into the finish. At first, I thought this was yet another match where Jay Lethal was really getting semi-squashed, but I felt like by the end, he had gotten enough offense and big moments that you didn't feel that way. And the thing I really liked about this match was I thought there was detail work that both guys did that I really enjoyed. Chad Collyer, I think his physical, his body language is really good. There's a moment in the match where it basically sets up the legwork for the rest of the match where Jay Lethal does a backflip to avoid a move or something, and Chad Collyer then just drop kicks the knee, and instantly Jay is selling, but instantly it's a bigger moment than just that spot that's going to come into play, because Chad Collyer instantly is just hovering around him like an animal about to pounce, and he's circling around him as Jay's writhing in pain, trying to get to the knee immediately. And then later on, there's a moment where Collyer's working Jay Lethal over, and as best as I can describe, he snaps on a figure four. Just the way he applies submissions and stuff, there's an urgency to Chad Collyer. I know you mentioned earlier, he's not really that charismatic in the ring, but I would argue his body language and just the way he applies moves and stuff, he has a bit of an intensity to him that I like. And as for Jay Lethal, what I really liked about him from this match is I thought he did a really good job of selling the knee. I think there was, there's a couple moves where he left his feet where people go, he shouldn't be doing leaping moves or stuff like that. But what I really liked is he did something, a way of selling the knee that I don't often see, where he was standing and not putting a lot of weight on his one leg. And there was a couple moments in this match where, normally in matches of a guy selling a limb, especially a leg, they'll sell it when they do a move involving that limb. But there was stuff where Collyer's running the ropes and Lethal is doing moves to him, clotheslines and stuff, and he's doing the moves bouncing on one leg, not putting his full weight on the leg, moves where he doesn't have to sell the leg, he's selling his leg, which I thought was I like that little detail work, and I thought it was really good. But overall, the match, I feel like a lot of people look at the live reports afterwards did not like this match, and the crowd didn't seem that loud for it. But I thought by the end, it was just kind of a solid, simple match that told a simple story pretty well.
Yeah, I would pretty much agree completely. I think both guys sort of seemed like they had something to prove. So they tried pretty hard. It didn't like totally click at every moment, but I thought down the stretch it was pretty good. I will say I was very surprised that Lethal lost. Just knowing that Lethal is a guy they're pushing and Collyer is a guy they never push. Now I get that Collyer, I guess, is going to be in a major-ish match the next night, and maybe that's why. But I don't know. They never really push Chad Collyer, and Lethal is on the upswing. Were you surprised with the result of the match?
Yeah, because it's weird because Chad Collyer feels like for a guy that gets semi-regular, like he doesn't as booked as infrequently as Collyer is, he wins more than you would expect. And especially a match like that, like if you compare Jay Lethal right now, look at the push Nigel McGuinness is getting. Like both Nigel McGuinness and Jay Lethal are technically getting pushes at this time, but the way Nigel's getting pushed is just like the straight up, he's getting big wins. And the way Lethal is getting pushed is more just like he's Samoa Joe's young boy who's striking out on his own, but he's really getting dominated quite a bit.
Yeah, but by like having a decent showing against Low-Ki and then losing to Chad Collyer doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, it definitely feels like a step back. And again, to set up a like storyless Low-Ki Collyer match, like did Collyer really need the win to justify that? I mean, does that make it like a more exciting match? I don't.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it just meant that they thought they had more plans for Chad Collyer than they did. But as far as some of the other stuff, like there's some commentary stuff in this match. Like at one point, Gabe said he kind of telegraphed the finish because he said at the beginning, if Chad loses, he'll have no future in ROH. Which you were complimenting on Glory by Honor that they were more realistic. Where like if Jay Lethal loses to Matt Striker, he'll be gone until next spring. This time they were just like Chad Collyer is just gone if he loses this match.
Yeah. Which
I thought that was intense. If anything should have gave him no future, it should have been the racist stuff that he said. Also, Nolte, in contrast with the woman stuff, he was actually woke in this match because he's talking about concussions, and he goes, concussion is too nice of a term. They should call it a brain injury. So he was like ahead of his time when it came to taking concussion seriously. Very behind the times with, I guess, everything else. But hey, points for that, Mark Nolte. But yeah, the match was okay. It was fine. It was solid. I guess solid would be the best word I could use for it.
I thought Nolte also had, like, for all the crap we give Nolte, rightfully so, you talked about an earlier commentary. I thought there was a genuinely good line he had during this match where on Chad Collyer, he says, can we get an English to English subtitles for Chad Collyer? Which I thought was like a legit good line.
That is good.
And one other spot I forgot to mention that I really liked was at one point Chad has Jay Lethal on the ring apron, kind of his knees are hanging over, and he's like jerking his knee over the ring apron. And when he does that, Lethal sits up in pain, and so Collyer like hits him, and then that puts Lethal's like back flat on his back on the mat. So he grabs his knee and jerks it back over there, and it goes. He does that back and forth like 4 times in a row, like a cartoon. And it's just one of those silly but fun spots that maybe it's a little more comical than you'd expect to see regularly in Ring of Honor. And I wrote in my notes, it's weird to compliment Chad Collyer in the context of what we've talked about, but I wrote in my notes again here, like Chad Collyer continues to be one of the most underrated Ring of Honor guys of this era, where I would describe him as like, he doesn't have show-stealing matches, but he always has like these solidly fun mid-card matches that are always like a little bit better than you expect going in, or at least like, you go, oh, every time I see Chad Collyer, I'm like, oh yeah, it's Chad Collyer, this should be okay, and then every time it's like, oh yeah, that's pretty enjoyable, like nothing crazy great. Like he always gives you a little bit. He always leaves me like with a little bit more than I expected going in. Although we did not, like you mentioned earlier, the Rocky Romero Chad Collyer match that was sold as like this great undercard hidden gem. On rewatch, we definitely did not like that as much as most people. And I thought it was interesting. Gabe during this match put over Chad Collyer by saying that Rocky Romero versus Collyer was one of the most underrated Ring of Honor matches ever, like one of the best openers ever. And he was even, I love that Gabe was like, it's getting rave reviews on the Ring of Honor message board, which was true, it was. But I just love how that's like a big selling point, is like rave reviews on the Ring of Honor message board. Yeah, that's about it for this match. So next up, BJ Whitmer, Dan Moff defeat the Carnage crew of DeVito and Loke in 11 minutes, 37 seconds when Whitmer pins Loke after he and Moff put a garbage can on him and hit the hell out of it with steel chairs. So initially, this match ends in seconds in a double DQ when all four men start swinging chairs at each other. So this is another of the matches on the show to help establish that the rules are going to be taken more seriously, because how often do you ever see a DQ in Ring of Honor? But it also sets up what we're about to see next, because then Mick Foley comes to the ring to a big pop, big Foley chant. And Mick says he didn't come all the way to Dayton, Ohio to see a double DQ. He asks, did anyone come to see a double DQ? And if so, raise your hands and say, I am a gutless pansy. Mick thinks the crowd wants to see hardcore wrestling. They want to see these four fighting with no rules, with a ref who knows how to call a hardcore match. Mick then says that man is not Todd Sinclair. He stares him down, and Todd Sinclair not having a good night. He's getting picked on.
Poor guy.
Yeah, and so Mick announces that he's the ref for the following hardcore match. Mick then realizes he's not licensed to referee in the state of Ohio, except that and I love this weird attention to detail. He brings up that he reffed a bra and panties match in Cleveland in August of 2001, so that Mick counts as him being licensed. Mick then goes to the back. He comes back out with a trash can full of weapons, and then we get the match that I just gave the time for, the actual match. Matt, what did you think about the hardcore match we actually got? Is this just showing Mick is right, that Ring of Honor is all about Ring of Hardcore?
I find it very funny that Mick Foley is implying that if you want to see a double disqualification, that means you have no guts. Like, I don't understand the context of that. But anyway, it's just a couple commentary things quick. Gabe says that the feud started, quote, innocently enough at Testing the Limit, and it's gotten more violent. So I just love the idea of a wrestling feud starting very innocently. Like, I don't know, just the concept of that is cute to me. It's just a regular brawl around ringside, at least for the first little while. They're just throwing each other into guardrails. They're pulling out tables. It's funny. Moff pulls out a table and sets it up in the ring, and then the crowd starts chanting, "We want tables," and I'm just like, fellas, it's there. Like there's a table there. You already got the table. But yeah, it's just like very standard stuff, and I thought it was really funny. At one point, DeVito whipped Whitmer into the rail and then yelled, "This is fucking hardcore!" And I was just like, okay. I mean, it just seems like a standard brawl to me. Like it feels like they were trying too hard to like put over the idea of hardcore, because like it wasn't like, but they were doing like all the ridiculous stuff they always do, like Loke throwing chairs at Whitmer's head, and it completely barely registers with the crowd or the announcers, which just shows like it was a total nothing spot at the time to just throw chairs at your head. Moff and DeVito blade. I think Loke blades at one point too. So they bleed. Nolte again puts over that Whitmer is a protege of Harley Race, because I guess that's his claim to fame still. And Foley mostly stays out of the way. He's a non-factor, which I guess is good. So they just brawl around ringside, throw chairs at each other's heads. Back in the ring, Moff drops DeVito on his head with a suplex, and Loke slams him in the head with a chair. At this point, I feel like, I don't know, the energy level just isn't really there. They do a chop battle, like a 4-way chop battle, but I don't know, it doesn't really do much for me. The crowd is pretty into it, I will say. Moff and Whitmer go for like a clothesline suplex combo, but DeVito pulls Moff to the outside. The Carnage crew, they hit the Carnage Plex on Whitmer for 2, and Moff sets up that table in the corner, and he does his cannonball into DeVito's head on the table and crashes through. That seemed dangerous. So there's a very delayed cover by Moff, but DeVito kicks out. Then they do that thing that they did at the last show where they put a garbage can over Loke's head and they just brutalize it with chair shots, and they get the win. I think that's what Loke and DeVito did to Whitmer at the last show, actually.
So a little bit of a story payoff, at least, where they're getting revenge by doing the exact same thing.
But the match itself, I don't know. I wasn't really feeling it. It just seemed very standard to me. Like they did some really scary stuff, but like the drama of the match to me wasn't there, and I didn't think it was that intense. The crowd seemed to like it more than I did. But I don't know. I appreciated, I guess, that the violence was there to further a storyline, but the match was not particularly dynamic, and I don't think the match was any good, if I'm going to be really honest.
I think you came up with the perfect phrase in your review to sum this match up, which is trying too hard. It felt like the commentary was trying too hard to put this over as like Gabe does this thing sometimes on commentary when it's a big gimmick match where he's like, this is how feuds end in Ring of Honor with like, we save the gimmick matches for like, the serious feuds. And he was doing a little bit of that here. And it's like, and he was going over like, this is how this feud progressed on this show, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I watched the shows. I didn't remember any of it because that's how unmemorable and how like little substance this feud has been based on. And so having Gabe trying to sell it like this is this is how feuds end. This is a big, and then knowing that after the match, this whole match was, had kind of a weight on it because Mick Foley was going to use it afterwards in the storyline as an example of like, this is real hardcore wrestling. This is great wrestling. And it's like, yeah, it wasn't the worst match you've ever seen, but it was like average at best, and it didn't live up to any of the commentary or the storyline. And it's like a lot of these Carnage Crew brawls, like sometimes I like the Carnage Crew, but sometimes you get matches like this where it's a lot of brawling at ringside, kind of plotting. Everyone, in this case, everyone but Loke is bleeding like in 3 minutes in. They throw each other into barricades 800 times. It's the kind of match that it's probably a lot of fun if you're in the front row, but if you're watching at home months or years later, it's kind of boring. And then when they go in the second half, yeah, you do see some suplexes. There are the couple of big spots you mentioned, but yeah, there just seemed to be something missing in that second half, even where it got to be more of a in the ring match and less of just the kind of generic brawl. And yeah, just probably my least favorite match, even though again, I it's not like the effort wasn't, I could tell, I'm sure these guys were trying hard because Mick Foley's there watching, it just, the effort, sometimes you need more than effort. And this match was missing something. I also felt like, Matt, Mick Foley was younger and sprier during this match, but did you feel kind of bad watching Mick Foley? Like, I noticed every time he had to stand up from counting a pinfall, he had to really base himself and put his hand on his one knee as he stands up, and took him a second to stand up. And I just felt like, man, like even in 2004, I know he was still going to wrestle some more, but like it felt like having Mick Foley referee a match at this point in his career was like cruel and unusual punishment, because just making him do something that required him getting off his feet and then standing back up over and over again, I felt bad.
So Mick Foley in 2004 would have been 39?
Yeah.
So it's, obviously that's not, it's barely older than me right now. But I did not spend a lot of my youth jumping off of ring aprons and landing on my hip. So that's rough for Mick Foley. And obviously, but he, when he put his mind to it, like he could still do great stuff, like just earlier that year with Randy Orton. But yeah, this is a rough spot for him to be in, considering it's not a super necessary role either. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Also, a couple of things I want to mention. You mentioned the DeVito screaming, "This is hardcore" into a cam. What you didn't mention was he was screaming it into the handheld that was being shot at ringside by Shane Hagedorn. And what I love is that's not the camera angle they used, because as we've established earlier, they don't always use the second camera. They just use that for backups.
Pretty much never.
Yeah. It's just like an emergency backup. So DeVito's playing to a camera that isn't being used, which I thought was funny. Loke also did this really ugly swinging DDT off a chair on the floor, which just looked not good at all. But again, it was one of those things where I was like, man, you guys are trying, but it's just something's missing. But anyway, after the match, the fans actually chant on their own volition, "Ring of Hardcore," so they're more into the storyline than I am. Mick gets on the mic and he says He knows hardcore when he sees it, and that match was hardcore. Mick thanks everyone for coming out, and he hypes up the rest of the show in kind of a lovable way, where he's like, we got a great card coming up, blah, blah, blah. He's almost like, he almost came off as like the host of SNL after the monologue, being like, we got a great show tonight, the Foo Fighters are here. Like, he had that kind of energy to him, which I thought was charming. Mick puts over Ring of Honor by saying it's every bit as good as WWE, which gets a big Ring of Honor chant. They really appreciate him putting it over that way. But then Mick says, I do love WWE. Vince still signed some pretty big checks for me. But then he goes, it's nice to know there's an alternative and that there's something that's sports and not sports entertainment. So Mick going fairly far in, his praise for Ring of Honor, kind of doing a little bit of light negging of his big-time employer. Mick then poses to chants. It looks like the segment's over when Ricky Steamboat comes out to the ring. He gets a few chants of his own. Mick says Ricky is a legend, and a few weeks ago, it would have been a pleasure to share a ring with him, but then Ricky had to go to Philly and bury him in his style of wrestling. And he says, now worse yet, you're coming out and you're ruining my pop. Ricky shits on the hardcore match that they just had. He says anyone can be a stuntman, which I guess is him using language that Ric Flair used in his book against Foley, which, as we've talked about on recent shows, this whole feud, the point of it is basically to try and Ring of Honor trying to do the Flair-Foley feud without having access to Ric Flair. Steamboat goes, it takes a wrestler to put an actual match together. Ricky notes that he calls hardcore wrestling garbage wrestling, and pointing to the garbage can in the ring, he goes, you certainly put the icing on the cake tonight with this. Mick says the problem is Ricky sees a garbage can, but that's all he sees, where Mick sees the guts and determination and the willingness to go to the extra mile for the fans. Mick says he'll be damned if he's going to be lectured on pure wrestling by a guy who wore gills and breathed fire, which I thought was a pretty good line. He gets a big reaction from the crowd. Mick says the problem is Ricky thinks the opposite of hardcore is pure wrestling, whereas Mick thinks that the opposite of hardcore is softcore. And then Mick says Steamboat is Ricky the softcore dragon. Crowd actually starts chanting softcore dragon. Steamboat notes that in Dayton they saw a 60-minute match last time they were in the city that the fans loved. He puts over Homicide and Punk from earlier tonight. He says those are guys who put their hearts and souls into things without using a garbage can. Steamboat goes over the matches he's had in his career with Don Morocco and Jake Roberts, Randy Savage and Ric Flair, and then he woos in Mick's face. Mick says Ricky deserves every accolade that comes his way, including his matches against Jake Roberts, which he says was the snake versus the little lizard. Then he goes, but Mick says his match with Randy Savage is one of his personal favorites. But if Steamboat enters the ring one more time and mentions the name of Dick Flair, they're going to have a little problem. And Mick says, tomorrow night, how about they settle this in Chicago, with Ricky bringing his best pure wrestlers, and Mick will bring his hardcore crew. And then I thought it was interesting, the fans actually booed that they weren't going to get to see this match tonight. So which, it's not often you hear the fans boo about, like, the booking, but it's kind of like one of those – you don't usually hear this in Ring of Honor where it's almost like a WWE type thing where it's like fans booing when they set up a pay-per-view match on Raw where the fans are like, hey, we're not going to see that here, boo. So I thought that was interesting. Ricky walks out, and Mick says the last thing he wants Ricky to hear is the sound of his music and the fans chanting his name. So I actually thought we've talked about I think this hardcore versus pure wrestling angle, I'm not a huge fan of it because it feels really forced, and I don't really buy that either guy's that passionate about their side of things. I actually thought the promos, though, actually kind of made me care about this angle because I thought both guys got off some good lines. Their deliveries were very good for the most part. My problem was, Matt, this was a significant promo segment, and I would say you could understand maybe at best 75% of what they were saying over the house PA system. And I think that's kind of a big problem for a segment built around promos.
Yeah, the promo itself, besides that problem that you mentioned, Mick Foley's a really good promo, pretty much no matter what. Ricky Steamboat is not famous for being a great promo. He was fine. I still am not totally buying into the subject matter, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it didn't get over with me so well, but it wasn't a bad segment. It was pretty good. It's just I don't know. Just it didn't totally work for me.
I was thinking the other day too. I think this is one of those things. A lot of things in Ring of Honor hold up from 15 years ago. I think this is one of those things that's really dated because, like, it feels like, especially in the wake of Ric Flair's book that came out at this time that was calling down Foley, but it feels like people going, hardcore wrestling isn't real wrestling and all this stuff. Like, that feels like such a conversation that was like a hot topic 20 years ago that, like, I feel like no one is that passionate about it today. Like, nowadays people are like, if you like GCW death matches, like, people are like, yeah, like what you like. Where back then, people got really mad if you liked or didn't like hardcore wrestling or considered it wrestling.
Yeah, I mean, there's still the whole, like, Jim Cornette type of vibe, but that's more like high spot wrestling, I guess. But it's the similar principle, right? Like, is this the wrestling that we've come to like? I mean, the thing is, I don't think anyone really deep down at the time thought of Mick Foley as like a garbage wrestler. You know, everyone knew that he was like just a great wrestler that excelled in those types of matches. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like this was more just like a petty thing between Ric Flair and Mick Foley personally, more than any real deep philosophical disagreement among fans.
And again, going into believability, like I was listening to, I forget what, but it was some old podcast from years ago, and they were talking about like the guy had been in the early 90s scene, like Mick Foley and Ricky Steamboat wrestled each other on house shows, and he was like, they had surprisingly great chemistry and had like a great matches. So, and it's just stuff like that where it kind of just, you know, obviously it's just a storyline, but it's really hard for me to believe that, like, you know, that Ricky Steamboat really thinks so little of Mick Foley, which is kind of what this whole angle is trying to sell, is that, you know, he's coming out these lines where you're a stunt man. It's like, those are Ric Flair's words, and I honestly don't believe that you believe that. I mean, I honestly don't even believe that Ric Flair believes that. I believe that Ric Flair just was pissed off that Mick Foley wrote in his book that he thought Ric Flair didn't do a good job booking him. And Ric Flair literally says in his book, this is the receipt. Like, he literally just says, I'm getting revenge on Mick Foley for saying that. So it's just a very fake feeling angle. But there are a couple notes from it. One from the Observer. Dave wrote around this time that Foley's attitude right now is to use the Flair book and Ring of Honor angles, feeling that he has the right to do so, but he doesn't want to work any angles that benefit Ric Flair financially. Matt, boy, does that change. Because he works in an actual feud with Ric Flair in WWE, which I have to imagine benefited both financially.
Yeah, I mean, you know, time passes.
Yeah.
Hurt feeling, offense. You know, even without the money involved, you know, you could easily see those two guys getting over it. You know what I mean?
I also feel, though, that there's a lot of things that guys were telling the newsletters and stuff that they wouldn't do, but it was more like they wouldn't do it for a certain amount of money. Because wasn't there a few shows ago we talked about there was a note in one of the newsletters that said, like, Ricky Steamboat doesn't want to wrestle because he feels like he couldn't meet his old standard. And it's like, well, maybe what Ricky Steamboat meant was he couldn't do it for like $4,000, like, but for a full-time contract in WWE, he could do it. But the other note from this that I thought was interesting was PW Insider wrote that this was kind of weird. They were talking about a live report about the segment, since most of the people around me had read. This is about the match. No, wait. You know what? This note doesn't even make sense at this point. Never mind. Never mind. No, wait. I got the note now. Never mind again. So, I guess from a live report said, so you know how I just said in the end of this angle, it was set up as like this impromptu thing for the next night. Like Mick Foley says, I'll get two of my hardcore guys and you get two of your technical guys and we'll settle this tomorrow. And in fact, there's a segment at the end of the show that shows Steamboat picking his two technical guys. So this live report said, this was kind of weird since most of the people around me had read that this match was signed weeks ago. So apparently, like, the tag match that they're acting like is completely impromptu was actually on, like, the record as happening weeks earlier.
I suspected that when I saw that promo. I was like, I have a feeling they were already promoting a match, like a match between those two camps for the next show.
Unfortunately, the Wayback Machine, I've been going to the old Ring of Honor website as it was time appropriate to get like old newswires and stuff. For some reason around this era, through the rest of the year at least, you can't get anything. It just goes to dead links no matter what. So that's the kind of stuff I'd love to catch there. If anyone has a way to like figure a way around that, probably there isn't, email us. But otherwise, Next up, we're backstage for intermission. Dave Prazak's with CM Punk. Punk's neck is getting iced down by his then-girlfriend, Tracy Brooks, who makes her first appearance in Ring of Honor in quite some time. Prazak asks Punk how his neck is doing. Punk says his pride hurts more than his neck, and it's not going to stop him from getting his hands on Generation Next. And tomorrow, the world title is coming home with him. Quick little promo. Next up, we have a 4-corner survival match. It's Nigel McGuinness defeating Josh Daniels, Matt Striker, and Roderick Strong in 16 minutes, 40 seconds when Nigel pins Daniels after he hits the Tower of London. Should note that, according to the Torch, Izzy was originally supposed to be in this 4-way, and he had to pull off of this event, and so Josh Daniels...
Because of a bad trip.
Yeah, because of the bad trip. His bad trip was Josh Daniels' big game, because he was apparently not originally slotted for this match until he had to pull off.
I'm always a little bit surprised to see Daniels at this point, because they've just phased him down so much. But I guess that makes sense. He's there as a replacement.
So I thought this was another match that was just kind of average at best. I've talked about this a lot. There are 4 ways I like. There are 4 ways I dislike. I like 4 ways that tend to be more spot festy, because I feel like a lot of wrestlers seem to have a hard time telling a story in a 4-way. Not that it's impossible, but a lot of wrestlers, you just don't see it that often. And so I prefer, if you're going to not tell a story, well, show me a lot of cool spots, have a fast-paced match. And this is the opposite direction of that, where 4-ways sometimes fail for me, where it's kind of like just mid-tempo, the kind of action you would see in the middle of a match for most of this match. And it's just guys trading off, doing a few moves, tagging out. It's not really exciting. There's not really a heavy story. The most that this gives you in terms of story is they do a little bit in the first half of the match based around everyone kind of picking on Roderick Strong, who's the heel, where they kind of exclude him and don't tag him in for a while. At one point, they all kind of take turns beating him up. But even there, the payoff to that, were for the first bit where they all don't let him get into the match, the payoff is supposed to be Nigel tags him in and then he punches him in the balls, I guess. But you see it only, the camera doesn't catch it and the announcers don't catch it. So the kind of payoff, the comedy payoff even for that bit doesn't make it. There's also a spot in this that I absolutely really disliked. Well, I didn't dislike the spot. I disliked the setup. So there's a spot in this match where the spot itself is fine. It's Nigel suplexes Matt Striker onto Roderick Strong, who's on his hands and knees behind them. The problem is how they set it up, which is the setup comes where Striker jumps in to break up a pin Nigel is making on Roderick Strong, and Nigel responds by getting to this weird, really angry, argument with Striker. He acts like he's been betrayed, and even Mark Nolte's like, "Oh, it's a 4-way. It's everyone for themselves." He's taking personal umbrage, but it's just to set up the spot so Roderick can get into position, and you can see Roderick really looking up at them and crawling over and adjusting and holding on all fours. It's just a really fake, belabored way to get to a moderately cool spot that I just felt was too much work and too ugly to get to it. But yeah, I don't have a ton to specifically get into the match. There was one cool spot right at the end, near the end, where Nigel's going to Tower of London Roderick, and then Striker spears Nigel as he's about to do it, and then Roderick flips into a sunset flip from the position. I thought that was cool. There was another problem too I held with the match, where on a night where Ring of Honor was all about enforcing the legal man and taking the rules seriously again, they definitely lost track of who was the legal man at points. And the ref did, and the announcers even acknowledged, well, I guess the ref can't keep track of it, where on a night where they were otherwise talking about how they were going to be so strict about it, this was, again, an example of how quickly that can backslide. But, Matt, I already feel like I've spent too much time talking about this match. It just too much time and not it was an average match, but for 17 minutes, I want more than something that's basically technically fine basic wrestling.
Yeah, I don't think you ever want just an average match, right? You'd like a good match.
Yeah, but especially if it's 17 minutes of average, if it's going to be average, give me 9 or 10 minutes.
I still thought Nigel looked pretty good here. I think he was definitely the standout. I think he's looked good pretty much every time. I thought some of what they were trying to do was kind of interesting. The whole keep out Strong, and then eventually where they make almost Strong the face in peril almost, I guess the heel in peril.
Yeah.
Everyone wanted to pay back Generation Next. I thought I sort of enjoyed that. But yeah, there was a lot of hard striking in this match. And I don't know, did you feel like Strong and Daniels almost had like a very similar vibe here? Like their builds are kind of similar. They both wore the red tights. Obviously Strong had a little bit more of that like Generation Next swag, obviously, but it's not like he had a ton of personality either at this point.
I mean, you could argue Stryker, Daniels, and Strong are all kind of in that kind of blandish white mid-card dudes. Obviously, Strong doesn't quite have the muscles of the other two. And obviously, Strong would turn out to be a great wrestler. And like you say, even here has a little bit more of a swagger, but they all kind of do fit a similar, like, competent, kind of missing something mold.
Yeah,
in some respects.
Strong and Daniels had similar like looks, like in terms of what they were wearing, and also like we're big into like the strikes, right? Like Daniels did chops also. So there was kind of like just like, yeah, but you're right. There was a lot of genericness in the match, and then Nigel, who was not generic at all. And, I also thought on top of everything you said, it did sort of fall apart kind of at the end where like guys were doing moves, but like there wasn't really much of a flow. Daniels did hit like an impressive high angle German suplex on Stryker at one point. I thought that was pretty cool, but yeah, the match was just disjointed, kind of sloppy. At one point, for no reason, Mark Nolte's like, what would be a good tag team? Josh Daniels and Chad Collyer. And I'm just thinking like, okay, like Gabe was probably just like, no, but hey, if you say so. But yeah, other than that, I pretty much agree with you.
Yeah, you had a good point too about it. That's the other flaw is it did get kind of sloppy at points too. Like I think at one point Roderick Strong and Matt Stryker fuck up a pump handle spot where it looks like Strong's going to do a pump handle move and he just kind of falls. They both kind of fall down and then Strong does like a schoolboy. And I think the announcing tries to act like, oh, that's an interesting, innovative thing, like a pump handle into a schoolboy. But if that was intentional, it wasn't a good idea because it didn't look good. But anyway, one little piece of Ring of Honor trivia, Matt, I might be wrong about this, but this is the first time I noticed Nigel using Roll On as a theme music. I think he had a different theme before. I think this is like one of those shows where another little thing falls into place because he used that theme for quite a while, I think. You're
right. I'm pretty sure up until the last show he used the cover of I Fought the Law by The Clash.
Yeah.
So you're right. That's a good point. I noticed it too, but I didn't put it together. This was the first time.
Yeah. So, and a lot of times I miss stuff like that, but sometimes I do catch those a little first, and it's one of those things you sometimes a little added bonus when you watch every show. You get to do this geeky thing where like, whoa, they don't know. Little do they know he'll be using that theme for years to come.
Well, actually, it wasn't. It's funny because like you remember the era, but he only used that theme for like I think like a year, maybe even less.
Huh. See, even my memory is bad, which is the whole reason we're doing this podcast. Not for fun, but so I can refresh my memory of the wrestling I watched 15 years ago.
In Through the Years time, he uses that theme for about 12 years, so don't worry about
it. That's one of my favorite lines you've had in a long time. Well, that's a good dig on, maybe because it's a dig on us. I can always appreciate. But coming up next, in the semi-main event, it's the Ring of Honor World Title match. Samoa Joe makes a successful defense of the Ring of Honor title. He defeats Rocky Romero via submission in 1811 using an STF, which is, I don't think we've seen Joe yet use the STF to actually win a match. It's a regular submission of his, but he actually gets the win here. Matt, I don't want to tip my hand. What did you think about, as I mentioned on the end of the last show, never seen this show before, so I've never seen this match before. What did you think about Rocky Romero versus Samoa Joe?
Well, it was hard not to compare it a little bit to the Reyes match, right? Would you agree? Like it's like you sort of immediately went to that comparison, which they had back in May of 2004.
Yeah, I mean, that's a natural comparison. Obviously, it's the other half of the tag champs in their single match. And I think I would argue that's like Reyes' best performance in Ring of Honor so far.
Yeah, we liked that match a lot. Way more than we expected. I think, and I apologize, my throat was a little dry, so I have a lozenge that I'm finishing. But so that if I sound kind of weird, but I think this match was technically better than that match, but I think I liked that match more. I expected less from it, and I think I got more from it. I think it was a little bit more high energy, and the crowd was like more into it, and there were some memorable spots. I feel like this was like good. Like it did a good job of like working the gimmick, which is Joe really dominated for a lot of this match, which makes sense, right? Joe's the champion. He's much bigger. Romero's a tag team guy, much smaller. And then at the end, Romero got some big spots, right? So like, the idea of Homicide cheats a few times so Rocky could kick Joe, and Rocky gets like a few advantages, but Joe will just like knock Romero down with like a big slap, or like, and he'll win all the strike battles that they try to do. I feel like this is one of the few matches where Joe goes for the ole ole kick and he just hits it the first time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that doesn't usually happen these days, despite what Mark Nolte says. And Gabe sells big. Like that anytime Romero fights back at all, Gabe is like, "Oh my God, Romero, I can't believe what he's doing." Like he makes a big deal out of any offense Romero gets, even though Romero's a tag team champion. So like near the end of the match, he gets a decent flurry of offense. He does a jumping DDT off the rope. And the announcers say Joe blocked it, but I don't know. It looked like he hit it to me. I guess because Joe dropped to his knees instead of
He
falling.
fell to his knees and he doesn't take any kind of head bump on it.
Okay. I went back and watched it. I thought it looked okay, but well, whatever. And then they do a strike exchange, and Romero actually gets the better of it with like slaps and jumping knees to the chin. But Joe gets his hand on the bottom rope. And I feel like Gabe at this point is like kind of overselling how close Romero is to victory. It never really felt like it was close, but Romero does do like a celebration after that near fall, because the idea is that Joe got his hand on the rope at the last minute, so it was like he thought he got a 3 count. And then Joe just hits a big knee to the side of Romero's head for 2, hits a big back suplex on his head, and Gabe calls Romero the toughest man on the planet, which again, like I just don't think matched what we were seeing. Romero does like a head scissors takeover into a cross arm breaker, but Joe like very quickly got the ropes. He got another big slap sequence, but Romero went for another arm breaker. Joe blocked it, powered him up, dropped him in a slam, got the STF, and just reared back until Romero tapped. Like you said, I think the first time that he went the STF. I thought the last 5 minutes were actually very good, but it was just a little bit too one-sided for me before that. But I didn't think there was anything specifically wrong with it. Like I think it told the story that it made sense to tell, and I thought the guys looked good. But it just felt like a long squash match, with a good 5-minute competitive match at the end.
So I'm going to. So you gave a reasonable review, like it seems like, well, you said it yourself, where it's not a great match, but not terrible. I like this significantly less than you. I thought this was maybe the most disappointing match of Samoa Joe's title run. And for me, that's like, this match was barely average. I might go lower than that. I really didn't like this match. So a couple of problems. One thing I would disagree with you, and we don't usually have major disagreements, but I would say I strongly disagree with you saying this match told the story it was meaning to tell, because I thought the intriguing thing about this match on paper, and how we talked about Joe's promo earlier in the night set it up so well, is the idea that planted the seed that Rocky Romero knows Joe's weaknesses. They train together in dojos, and he might give Joe a real run for his money. The commentary tries to hype it up, and as you point out, Rocky Romero gets pretty dominated in this match, and at no point in this match does Romero do anything that would suggest that he has any kind of insight or knows anything. Like you even mentioned, Joe hits the ole ole kick the very first attempt, which a lot of times he doesn't. Like, there's no moment where like Romero goes, "Oh, I figured you out," or "I know a hidden weakness." Romero gets treated like, kind of, I mean, I know he's not nearly on the level of Joe, but he's one half of the tag champs, and he gets really like dominated. And I also, in terms of like the action of the match, I felt like the first half of the match, I appreciated that they were doing something different. I always love variety, and it was very different than most Joe and matches, where it was a lot of just standing on their feet, doing hard kicks, and then like clinches in the ropes. It was almost like a worked shoot, although not very believable. But the problem was they kept just doing the same two things over and over again, where it started to feel like less like like a fight and more like these two guys were having a sparring session. Like it just, and then when in the second half, it's like they flip a switch and goes, okay, this is going to be a regular Samoa Joe match, except it felt like a less exciting version of a Samoa Joe title match, like an inferior version of it, because normally I really love Samoa Joe title matches. And even the end where like Joe, I love that Joe he has used so many different finishers to win during this title run, but I felt like in a match where Rocky Romero got dominated so bad, having Romero tap out near the ropes to the STF, which is a submission that Joe uses in every match practically and no one loses to, I felt it was weird because I am sure Joe and Romero are friends, but the way it wrestled, it felt like Romero was getting buried a little bit almost. Yeah, I was kind of intrigued by this match on paper, and I just felt like I just one of the most disappointing matches I've had of watching Ring of Honor on this rewatch. I just really didn't like it.
Well, one thing I'll agree with you on, you didn't quite put it this way, but this was a B-level world title match, and it was treated like one. You know what I mean? Like they didn't give Romero a lot of big moments to really make you think that he was going to win, despite what Gabe did. Would you agree with me that Gabe sort of oversold how well Romero was doing?
Oh, I forgot to mention that when you made that point, I was like pumping my fist because I wrote in my notes like, not just was he overselling like that Romero had a chance to win, but then when Romero was kicking out of like standard Joe offense later in the match, every time he was acting like Romero was he was basically acting like no one's ever kicked out of those moves before, and that Romero was the toughest man ever. Like it felt like he was almost trying to overcompensate.
Yeah, I mean he was literally overcompensating.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with a lot of your points. I guess when I would say, like, worse than average, like, would I really rather watch that Special K tag team match than this one? Or the Trent Acid match than this one? Like, no. Like, these are good wrestlers, and they were doing good stuff. But, like, there were, I think, like, there was the presentation left something to be desired. I agree with you that there was a lot of, like, repetition early on, where, like, they would do these strike battles, but like then like, and you'd think like, oh, Romero, he's a hard striker, but then Joe would always just win the strike battle. And they did that like maybe like 3 or 4 times in the early part of the match. Like I agree that's a little too much. Like I think maybe the size difference got it. I mean, I don't want to psychoanalyze Samoa Joe, but maybe the size difference got into his head. And he was sort of like, I can't treat this guy like he's on my level. Like, and Romero was just sort of like, yeah, I get that. Because, I mean, but just like in terms of like the pecking order, he wasn't on his level, so what was he going to do? And also, Joe had a much bigger main event the next night. But I
feel like I was just going to say, but even if like you go by that standard, like we've seen Joe in a very similar situation where he wrestled Mark Briscoe, an undersized tag champ lower on the card than this in like kind of a B title defense. And I would argue like, that was a much better match than this.
I mean, Ricky Reyes, like I said, I like this. I like this match a lot more than you did, but I definitely like the Ricky Reyes match more. And when I say I like this match a lot more than you did, I'm like, this is a 3-star match. I
wouldn't even hit 3 stars for this.
Right.
I wouldn't say like, oh, this is a dud or whatever. But and to your point, like. You talking about wanting to see the Special K match for this, I think that brings up a good point, which is maybe I judge a match like this harsher than I should just because the difference is like when I see Special K versus Delirious and Jimmy Jacobs in a random tag, like I don't have high expectations. Not that I think it's going to be terrible.
No, of course,
but
like of course.
This was like an intriguing match on paper. I was legitimately, this was maybe the match I was most interested in seeing because I hadn't seen this match before. And even Homicide and CM Punk, like I had seen them wrestle multiple times before. And even that angle of the idea of, oh, they do know each other well and they do have like legit history behind the scenes. Like I just thought I was going to see more.
Yeah, I think the biggest difference, I guess, between us is that my expectations weren't that high because if like I figured like, this is 15 and a half years later, almost 16 years later, that I would have heard more about the match. And also just like, I don't know, like I liked the last 5 minutes a lot. So that's the biggest difference, I think, between the two of us in terms of how we saw this match.
And the other thing I have to say to be completely fair is, that Observer report said that and I think Ring of Honor said afterwards, if this is to be believed, that Romero did get knocked out legit during the match via slap. And in the interest of fairness, I'm not going to change my review of the match because, we can only review what we actually got. But in fairness to them, like, if a guy gets legit knocked out in the middle of the match, that could drastically change what they had planned, maybe, or just your ability to perform.
That's true. I mean, he still seems like he did a pretty good job then in that case. The funny thing is, like he got knocked out by a slap. And it's funny because we remember the Reyes. I mean, obviously that's not funny. It's horrible. But like we remember the Reyes match where that slap was like super memorable and loud. And it sounds like sometimes it's like the most auditorily impressive things are not the most devastating things, because that was like the loudest slap of all time, and I don't think Reyes got knocked out. Whereas Romero apparently did, and I like it didn't register in terms of like how it seemed on TV the way that the Reyes one did.
Yeah, slaps are weird where it feels like usually they're not going to hurt you, but like it's always like it could just randomly hit in the right place and ruin things. Like, wasn't the story with, our 2003 match of the year, Steve Corino versus Homicide? Like, I think Homicide relayed that, like, that Steve Corino just hit him in, like, the exact right spot to rupture his eardrum. Or it was the other way around. I think Steve Corino got his eardrum ruptured.
Right.
And Homicide just hit him, he probably could slap him another 20 times and not do that. But he just hit him, like, in that perfect spot where, yeah, it's crazy how a guy like Ricky Reyes, he can huge slaps, and then there's no one slap on this show where you go in this match where you go, oh, that definitely clearly would knock a guy out legit, but apparently it did. I mean, just the world of slaps, Matt.
It's unfortunate. I think we can both agree this match did not slap.
Yeah, exactly. It was not a banger, and it did not slap. The only other thing I want to mention from the match is just to keep up with the trend. This night was kind of booked around showing the rules would be enforced. Early on in the match, Homicide, who was at ringside, grabs Joe's leg, and they make a big point of having, I think it's Todd Sinclair, like seeing it and then injecting Homicide from ringside, which again is something that we had not been seeing a lot of in Ring of Honor. So they really did try hard this night to do a lot of spots and finishes that were built around showing you the rules are more. We're actually going to pay attention to the rules for a few months. But finally, in our main event, Jimmy Jacobs and the Second City Saints of Ace Steel and CM Punk, scored to the ring by Ricky Steamboat and Tracy Brooks, defeated Generation Next of Alex Shelley, Austin Aries, and Jack Evans in 32 minutes, 26 seconds when Punk pins Aries after he hits the Pepsi plunge. So before the match, Alex Shelley gets on the mic and he informs us that we're about to witness a very special occasion as Generation Next is going to take their place as the greatest faction in the history of Ring of Honor. Shelley says they're going to put that has-been Ricky Steamboat where he belongs. Then Shelley tries to continue, but then Aries snatches the mic out of his hand so he can say that Generation Next is going to destroy the Saints and Steamboat, but then after that, the only thing left to do is going to be to see who will get the Ring of Honor World title. Shelley seems not impressed by that. So
Trouble in Paradise.
Yeah, they're continuing that storyline where Aries is trying to assert himself, and Aries is kind of making it clear that we're going to be in a race to see who wins the world title.
It's interesting looking back now, realizing that like they definitely were planting the seeds of Aries winning the title. Like it was a surprise when it happened, but like it's not like they didn't lay the groundwork for it.
Yeah, like sometimes when I look back at booking, I go like, well, when did they know they were going to do this, or when did they, and obviously we don't know exactly when Gabe. Like I always would love to know, when did Gabe decide that Aries was going to be the guy to beat Joe? Like was it after Testing the Limit? Was that after Survivor of the Fittest? I don't know, but we definitely know, like from the last couple shows, I think it's pretty clear he knew by this point that it was going to be Aries. So before the match, Aries tugs on Tracy Brooks's dress, gets a slap in the face from her for his trouble. Punk tries to attack Aries right then, and then to keep the problematic stuff going, although I have to admit, I'm ashamed to admit I laughed at this, Jack Evans screams, Jack Evans gonna have to choke a bitch. And for some reason, Jack Evans trying to act tough like that, I laughed. I can't help it.
It's also a bit of a Chappelle Show reference,
Yeah,
it's 2004.
Yeah, exactly. This is another very 2004 moment. So, Matt, it's weird. Like, this is a match that went on for a long time that I enjoyed, but it's hard to have a lot to say about. Like, the way I would describe this match is it was like a house show match, but in a good way, where it felt kind of low stakes, but it also felt like everyone was having fun. For a Ring of Honor main event, usually they do feel like they have higher stakes and more on the line. Even though this match had a spot where Tracy Brooks gets drop kicked by Austin Aries, leading to a big brawl, it didn't seem like there was that much hate between the two teams, maybe as much as you'd expect, even though they're technically in a feud at this point. But I just like the match. I feel like it's almost like how I said Punk and Homicide in the opener was like a consistent 8 out of 10. This match might have had a few peaks and valleys, but I felt like this was like a consistent 7 out of 10. It was just like there was usually something going on. It was usually fun. There's some spots I could point out that were fun. I thought Jack Evans, as always, Jack Evans is just fun all the time. He is so good at like taking a beating, at being a little shit, even on the ring apron. And I talked about this on Twitter. This might be the screen cap for the show, but I don't know if I've ever seen CM Punk happier than when he got to wrestle Jack Evans in a singles exchange here. He just has a smile from ear to ear. He really dominates Jack Evans, and I think Jack Evans has probably got to be one of the most fun guys to like wrestle because he just sells huge for people. He's bendy. You know, he'll take a beating. He's such a great shit talker. It's easy to like get over on him, so to speak. But yeah, this match just felt like a B-show house show match where they even had like some of the goofy spots, like, you know, Punk's doing the 10 count punches and things like that. Like it just felt almost like an old school house show main event with some modern indie offense. And even just the end where the match ends and then Punk and the whole face team and Steamboat like cuss in the ring to end. It felt like a very simple old school, like send the local crowd home happy finish. And I don't know. I have a feeling I might like this match more than you, but we'll see. Like, what did you like? Am I overrating this a little too much? Because it's not a special match, but I thought it was an enjoyable half hour.
I mean, you're right that you enjoyed it more than me. I definitely liked it more than I liked the 40-minute elimination match from the last show. I thought the crowd was into it, you know, so I'll give him that. But it was too long for me. Like, I agree with a lot of your compliments that it felt like it was low stakes, but like fairly enjoyable, you know, like some of the performances were good. But I feel like it would have been a very good match if they just like cut it in half. Like, it really did not need to be that long. And I guess, like, when you're making your house show comparison, I guess it makes sense, because sometimes at house shows, they do give the guys more time to just kind of, like, mess around and work the crowd and stooge and, like, you know, just, like, really get into their, like, heel-face dynamics. Yeah. Which I guess they did here, but I don't know. It just, like, as the match went on, it just felt a little too low stakes for me, you know, for a main event. You know, there was some fun stuff early, you know, like Aries taking an inverted atomic drop cell that would make Rick Rude proud. I like that. And all the stooging, the begging off with the low blow, the break dancing where Evans does some break dancing, then he does a random backflip. So there's a "you got served" chant. So then Punk drops down and Ace just like shoves Evans over Punk's back. So like the server became the servy. That was, you know, just like fun little, like, you know, like house show stuff. Like you said, like Punk doing a robot dance, which Gabe calls the most ridiculous thing he's ever seen in an ROH ring. I really did enjoy that stuff. I just wish sorry.
Oh, you go on.
I just wish it had gone on like maybe for 5 minutes instead of like 12. And then they did the rest of the match. At one point, where there's this move where Aries and Shelley hold up Jacobs for a double vertical suplex, and Evans basically jumps over the top of Jacobs and grabs his leg on the way down to drive him down in the suplex. And Nolte goes, "Jiminy Cricket, he was airborne," which I wish I could just like naturally put that into my lexicon, yelling like "Jiminy Cricket" in excitement, but I don't think I can do it. Here's the thing that I didn't really understand. So, like, Punk got a hot tag, and then, like, the hot part of the tag lasted, like, a minute, and then it just settled into, like, a pretty regular match. But then Aries and Punk did this crisscross spot, when then Aries, all of a sudden, while crisscrossing, does a sudden baseball slide into Tracy Brooks. first of all, violence against women, I'm still not into it. Like, I still think it's bad, but the camera totally missed it. And I wrote down, like, well, it finally ratchet up the intensity. But then it kind of doesn't. Like, it ratchets it up for, like, about a minute. Then Steamboat helps Tracy Brooks to the back, and then it just becomes a normal match again, back in the ring. Like, the same level of intensity, basically, with Punk as the face in peril. And it goes on for a long time. And I don't know. Like, I thought that was a good opportunity to, like, just, like, have the match get to hard-hitting mode and then end. But instead, they just really slow it down again. And that just didn't work for me. I don't know. Like, there were still cool spots. Like Steele holding up Jack Evans for a spinal shock. And while he's holding up Jack, CM Punk hitting a swanton onto Jack. Like, and then Steele hitting the spinal shock. Like, that's a crazy move. And, like, certainly not one you'd expect CM Punk to do. And, like, just goes to the point he was really feeling it this weekend.
Yeah. I was going to say, like, that's the kind of thing that CM Punk probably only attempts when he's like, I'm on a roll. Like, just because, I was shocked.
Yeah. I mean, that's a crazy high spot. That's really cool. And CM Punk's not usually the crazy high spot kind of guy. And Evans is not usually the one on the receiving end of such high spots. But, like, that happened after Punk got this really big hot tag after a long heat sequence. And then Punk was just back in the ring right away. Even Nolte pointed it out, like, why is he back already? And then he was the face in peril again. And Jacobs came in and hit the Contra Code on Shelley while splashing Aries on the way down. That's all good stuff. It's funny because, like, there was almost like a preview of the ending of Aries and Punk's title match where Punk wins the title months later, where Aries goes to Pepsi plunge Punk. Punk fought him off, went for one of his own, but Aries backdropped him. Then, of course, Strong hit the ring, and Gabe calls him Roderick Steele, I guess because he has a steel chair. I don't know. And, Steamboat grabs the chair away, blah, blah, blah. And then Steamboat picks Punk up, and Punk hits the Pepsi plunge on Aries for the win. So, like, the ending had some good drama and some good spots, but, like, why did it have to be as long as it was? I guess if you appreciate like the whole house showness of it, like kind of like the looseness of it, I could see that. It didn't work for me on that level.
I think a point I failed to mention this, and I think you did a good job highlighting it, is there's a weird, we talk about like the looseness and the house show feel, but like you mentioned, it's weird that 2 times in this match, Tracy Brooks, who was CM Punk's girlfriend at this time, and I think they acknowledged that during the show, like, Aries like goes after her early, and that starts this brawl. And then later he intentionally drop kicks her, and Ricky Steamboat has to take her to the back. And both times you think, well, this should give Punk a reason just to go apeshit in this match to get intense. And both times it doesn't really ratchet up at all. And in fact, at the end of the match, like Steamboat and Punk and everyone are doing the Huss gimmick together and like laughing and joking around. It's like, dude, your girlfriend just got drop kicked and you don't know how she's doing. Like it's like it felt like they were like used her as a prop with no payoff. Like you kept expecting, well, her getting taken out is going to lead to some kind of payoff spot or change the course of the match. And really, it just felt like they just did it just to do it. Like it was a
right.
weird thing.
That didn't even occur to me that like CM Punk was hussing with Steamboat and Jacobs at the end of the match. And it's like, if I were Tracy, I'd be pretty pissed.
Like you saw, she got drop kicked and had to be like helped to the back by Steamboat.
Yeah.
And you're just like, this has been a fun time, folks.
Yeah. Punk takes the time to like do the belt motion and like, it's just like, you're right. Like it makes it, he would just like immediately win the match and run to the back, right? Like that would sell that angle. But they never really make Tracy a character. I mean, she's still with TNA, so it's sort of like they never really go in on her being part of the storylines, but it's like, yes, it's not like she was a prop here. She was a prop here because she's never given a character ever in ROH ever, and she's not really cared after by her boyfriend. Which I don't know what their real life relationship was like. But if I were her as a character, I'd be pretty pissed.
It has to be as simple as like Punk's girlfriend was in town. She's here anyway. Why not have her on the show? Hey, if she's on the show, why don't we do a spot? But again, it does not fit the rest of the match or the tone of anything that happens. But
right. They were like, Allison's not here to take a violence against women, so maybe Tracy can do it.
Our little dose of like weird treatment of women. At one point, Mark Nolte gets on the Jerry Lawler act where when Jacobs needs to make a hot tag, Nolte says, "Follow the beacons at ringside," which of course the beacons are Tracy Brooks's breasts. Yeah, but to sum up this match, if you want
I got another Mark Nolte line actually.
Oh, go on.
Where he's talking about, he kind of calls out the whole, being called misogynistic earlier in the show. And let me find the line. Oh man, I lost it. Oh boy. Okay, so I can't find it, but here's basically what he says. He says, "I don't mind women at ringside when they're a part of the match and not on an episode of Star Search." And I'm like, that's not helping your cause.
And also, that's not that isn't even, that's outdated in 2004. Talk about fucking Star Search.
Oh, that's true also.
Yeah, also, this is another match where right near the end they had a legal men lay out the legal man once on each team, and the ref make a point going, "No, I won't count this." So they really did go all out this night trying to sell that they had changed on that. I guess the best way to sum this up is if you want like a great, intense, meaningful, important Ring of Honor main event, this isn't the match for you. If you want like maybe a 3.5-star match where CM Punk does the robot and Ace Steel does a hot tag wearing Jack Evans' do-rag, well then this is the best match you'll ever see. But yeah, that sums up the main event. So after the match, the winning team celebrates. And this is another great moment. Alex Shelley, I don't know if you picked this up. So like you mentioned, Matt, I didn't mention it. I should have. Near the end of the match, Roderick Strong came in with the chair. Steamboat took him out to give you the Steamboat wrestling for the night, give fans a nice pop. So at the end of the match, after it's over, Shelley's on the outside, and he says to Roderick Strong, "You were supposed to," and then Shelley mimes swinging a chair, and he goes, "You were supposed to," and he mimes swinging, and he goes, "With a chair, like La Parka," and then he pauses, and then he just screams, "La Parka," and he's just like, so mad at Strong. Well, not mad, but just like, Shelley. And as we record this, Shelley just debuted back in Impact as the Motor City Machine Guns with Chris Sabin. And I really hope good things for Alex Shelley because he is so underrated in these little comedy moments like that. He's so good in the little things that maybe you might not see that are like just barely getting caught by the camera. I just love that stuff.
He's impossible to dislike.
Yeah, I know some message board. There are some people that definitely don't like his wrestling, but
Well, as a person.
Yeah, he seems like a good guy. So cut to backstage for our final segment. Steamboat is there. He says Generation Next got a taste of what happens when you get up in his face. And then Steamboat reveals his 2 chosen wrestlers for tomorrow's tag against Mick Foley's team, which we do not get told who they are. I guess we can assume they're Moff and Whitmer. But he shows us it's Chad Collyer, Nigel McGuinness. They awkwardly pose.
Mark Nolte is like, it should have been Josh Daniels.
That's the Jiminy Cricket. That's a real tag team. So that's the end of Ring of Honor Gold. My first time ever seeing the show. One of the rare shows.
Well, sorry. Steamboat actually says at the end of that promo to Mick Foley, "Bring your bad boys on." Ricky Steamboat's a good promo. I feel like he did some of those animated promos in his life in ROH, and they're just very funny.
Yeah, I love his energy. I love his dad energy in Ring of Honor. But so that's Ring of Honor Gold. That is definitely probably one of the most B shows we've covered in a long time.
In a long time, yeah.
And again, it amazes me that this is the show that Dayton really came out for. And maybe it's because the last show was had such a strong match on it. But and if I looked, I won't run it down now, but like, all of the cards Dayton gets for 2005 are all better than this, on paper at least.
2005 ROH gave Dayton some real good stuff.
Yeah. I mean, stuff like the finals of the Aries, not Aries, but the finals of the Homicide Danielson 5-match series, which I think is in a steel cage. I think it's where Jamie Noble wins the Ring of Honor title. I'm not sure.
It definitely is, yeah.
So yeah, they get big. Gabe, to his credit, if he was kind of maybe not giving them his best foot forward here because he was thinking maybe this might be the last show, he definitely rewards them in 2005 in terms of some big matches for a kind of a second tier market. But as a show, I thought this was I think it says something we've talked about in the past, that Ring of Honor had such depth and was on such a good streak that even a not great show is still very watchable. I would say this is very watchable. I would say this is the closest to not watch. Like it's a perfectly fine way to pass the time. Punk and Homicide is a legit very good match. Not quite like you have to go out of your way to see it, but legit pretty darn good. It's just it's one of the most inessential shows, maybe the most inessential Ring of Honor show of the entire year.
Yeah, I could see that. It probably is. Like, you know, you got shows like from real early in the year, like The Last Stand, you know,
Yeah.
which like you could see maybe making the case for, but this is gives it a run for its money. But Homicide versus Punk is it's in the top third of matches, I would say, from the year. Like, it's a really, really good match. And like I said, I think the best opener they ever did, at least up until this point in the history of the company. So that's not nothing. But yeah, no, this show is, it's not much. It wasn't bad, but it was not particularly good.
Yeah. But again, if this is the worst Ring of Honor gets in 2004, pretty darn good year for them.
For sure.
And that brings us to the end of the show. So if you want to contact us, throughtheyears@gmail.com. Be like Michael Laney if you have a great lives event story in particular. If you have magazine scans to send us, any magazine, Good Housekeeping, just scan it, send it to us. ThROH. Okay, maybe not. I already regret saying that.
Keep it PG rated.
At Twitter, @Trevor Dame, or @Mayor MGF for Matt. MGF, I just want to make sure I said that clearly. I've been stumbling over some words tonight. I swear to God, I'm not drunk. I wasn't celebrating just because it's the 50th episode.
It's very hot here. I might be like heat drunk.
Oh, it's boiling here.
Yeah.
Pro Wrestling Only, we have a message board in the plug section if you prefer to contact us that way. I have a dumb Patreon completely unrelated to this at www.patreon.com/Mecca. That is MECCA twice in a row. Some people like it. Some people don't. And that brings us to Matt. We are finally in that special time of the year because we are starting with the next show, we are in the final 5 shows of the year, which means it's the countdown to Final Battle. It's the countdown to our end of the year summary where we give our honors out, our little awards. We recap some things. We kind of give overall thoughts. Always a fun time. And I would argue, Matt, looking over the next 5 shows, this might be the most eventful 5 consecutive show stretch in the Gabe era of Ring of Honor ever, because we got, starting with the next show, we are going to cover next time, Punk versus Joe 2. Which one of the most important. Go on.
No, I was going to say, which is still to a lot of people the greatest match in ROH history.
And it was also, a little spoiler, some of the news we'll talk about, it was the best-selling DVD Ring of Honor ever put out up to this point. It was a match that got them way more attention in the ways. It was the first 5-star match Dave Meltzer had given a match from America, I believe, in 7 years, back before Dave gave them out every 2 seconds. So that's a huge show. After that, we've got both nights of the Weekend of Thunder double shot, which is Liger coming to Ring of Honor, including his for night 1, that's him versus Danielson. Night 2, it's the dream tag of him and Joe versus Danielson and Low-Key. Then after that, we've got All-Star Extravaganza 2, which is Joe versus Punk, the end of the trilogy, plus Jim Cornette facing off against Bobby Heenan for the first time ever.
And that third Punk versus Joe match, some people like that even better than the hour-long matches.
Yeah, and we'll have to, we'll obviously only we can decide for sure. We are the authorities until we decide. Yeah.
Really only me. But yeah.
Okay. I'll take your lead on this one. And then And then finally, then we'll have the year-end award show, which will also be Final Battle, which is the end of Samoa Joe's title reign, losing to Austin Aries. So that's 5 straight shows. There is not – every show is huge. There's not a weak one in the thing. It's just a crazy run, and it all starts with the next episode. So if you thought – I like doing these B shows. I feel like we find fun little things. I think we found a lot of little weird things that happened during the show that people won't remember or never talked about. But if you're the ones that you just like, I want them to cover the big shows, well, the next 5 shows should be like friggin' through the years heaven for you because they're all big.
Yeah, there are no more B shows this year.
Yeah. So that's the show. Thank you for listening to us for 50 episodes or 1 episode or whatever. Thank you for plugging us, supporting us, being nice to us, for spending any time of your life, which is, time, our most valuable commodity, on this show. I hope it continues to be as fun as it has been. I thank Matt so much for asking me to do this and getting me to come out and do this. Until next time, have a good time. Have a great time.